Hello and welcome to our live stream. Take two Cuneiform tablets and call me in the morning. We have had a lot of technical issues today, and a lot of it is from things that were really out of our control. We discovered that our stream key got reset. We did not do this. Somebody else has done this. So we don't know what hankiness is going on here, but that prevented us from automatically connecting like we normally do. So that was interesting. That was a surprise. Our Twitch settings are also not working for some reason. So we do see that there are some technical issues today that we don't normally experience. And I think that is kind of an issue here. So I am going to need to see if I... All right. Yeah, YouTube's made some changes here that are not fun. Okay, there we go. All right, we're back live. Yeah, YouTube has made some changes to its interface. And those changes are... They didn't let us know. They did not let us know. So things happen, and that's the problem with live broadcasting. All right, so anyway, we're glad you're here tonight. We want to thank everyone who has given us super chats so far. We have been thoroughly blessed tonight in a way that we couldn't even have imagined. And given the week we've had this week, we so appreciate the support, and we'll feel so blessed that our community has rallied around us. We want to thank you all for being here tonight and for just supporting the channel and supporting the work we're doing. We just feel so blessed. And we are faced with both, one of the things about blessings is you have an abundance. And tonight we have an abundance of questions and super chats. So we're still going to try to stay within the 4-hour, 3-hour. We try to be 3-hour format. We're really a 4-hour format. Okay, let's be honest. We're no longer a 3-hour format. We're a 4-hour format. However, to prevent this to be from a 6-hour format, we're going to have to be really brief with a lot of questions. We are starting with 23 super chats tonight. I think, 25 super chats tonight. And we are, we even have some non-super chats that are just so good that I just can't pass them by. So, we're just going to quickly go over the rules, and then we're just going to get right into it. And let's see, I want to make sure I didn't miss any here either, so I want to just check. Okay, so that's where we left off. Make sure I didn't lose anything here. So because I had to reboot, I'm sort of starting a little bit from scratch here. So let me make sure I've got everything I can get. Okay, one is falling through the cracks here that I have to copy and paste over. And let me just capture that now so I do not miss that. And then we'll get right into the questions. Okay, so let me just do the maintenance here. Again, the whole connection issue was an inconvenience. This will be just a moment. Please be patient. Okay, and for those who are not familiar with our live streams here, the rules are same as always. Super chats have priority. If you we do answer questions from non-super chat that are not given by super chat. We ask in those particular cases that you put a Q and a colon in front of the question, so I know that it's directed to me. We ask that you do the question only once, and if it's about a language or a Bible verse, tell me what language you think it's in and what you think it means. Or if it's for a Bible verse, tell me what book, chapter, and verse it is so that I have some context to go on so I can look it up. Okay? Because despite what everyone may think, I don't have the entire Bible tattooed behind my eyelids. So I do need a little context sometimes. All right. So I think we got that missing super chat here. So, with that said, let's get into the questions, because, boy, we've got a good set of questions tonight. All right. Our first question, and we'll start with 5 non-super chats tonight. The Camel Leopard. He asks, continuing from last week, since you have had time to study now, yes, I did, are the Sermon on the Mount and the Sermon on the Plain, Luke 6, synonymous? They're similar. I did look into this. They are very, very similar, but they're different. I think what we're seeing with, say, the Sermon on the Mount and Sermon on the Plain is two different ideas basically using the same precepts. Okay? So basically, the Sermon on the Plain is basically, you should follow the law. Okay? Basically, as opposed to, say, the Sermon on the Mount, which is, the law is so arduous. And it basically, Christ in the Sermon on the Mount amplifies upon the law, basically raises the bar to a point where nobody can follow it. So they are very similar. I will give that, and it might have been even that Christ had used the Sermon on the Mount in very similar ways, but sort of tweaked it just slightly for Sermon on the Plain versus Sermon on the Mount. It does seem that in the one case that the Sermon on the Mount they're very, very similar. For example, the number of Beatitudes. Like, for example, the Sermon on the Plain has 4 Beatitudes, versus the Sermon on the Mount that has 9 Beatitudes. So there does seem to be a duplication of material. Basically, material is being reused from one sermon to the other. But the goals of the two sermons seem to be different. Very, very different. The Sermon on the Plain seems to be to drive people towards living Torah. Basically, you are supposed to be living according to the law of Moses in its intent. Not necessarily in every jot and tittle, but in its intent. Whereas the Sermon on the Mount seems to be driving, Jesus is using the Sermon on the Mount to drive people more towards that. Yeah, you can try to live Torah, but the standard of Torah is so high that no one can make it. Because nobody can make it, you need God's grace. So they're two sermons constructed in very, very similar ways with different didactic outcomes. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. It's a great, great question. Thank you very much for the question, and I'm glad we had the chance to actually look into this and address it again this week. So, I hope that answered your question. All right, our next question here is from the Penniless Theologian. How do we know the Hyksos introduced the chariot into Egypt? Heard someone question this a few days ago. All right, a few reasons why. Now, there is some scant fragmentary evidence that there were a couple of chariots introduced into the Old Kingdom, but they didn't seem to take off. Part of the problem is that when we see, say, Egyptian warfare scenes, and we've got a number of warfare scenes from ancient Egypt, they didn't use chariots according to the warfare scenes, especially when we look at, say, the warfare scenes of the Middle Kingdom. And we've got a lot of warfare scenes from the Middle Kingdom. We've got a lot of scenes of people training for war, conducting war, and those scenes never include chariots. They're all infantry, they're all siege equipment. There's a lot of really sophisticated warfare scenes from the Middle Kingdom. There's absolutely no evidence of chariotry there. We also, when we look at, say, horse burials are super important when it comes to this, because the native Egyptian horse is a frail being. It's frail, it doesn't have a strong back, it's inappropriate for pulling chariots or riding. So, what we have, for example, with the Hyksos, is the Hyksos seem to have imported horses from the Levant, bred them with the native horse, and created a more robust horse. At the same time, too, they're importing chariots from the northern Levant. So they're bringing that technology in. And it's with the Hyksos that we see the first sort of evidence of horse burials, the bit and bridle, and basically smaller components of chariots. So what we're seeing here is we're going from a state of evidence where the pictorial evidence of the Egyptians is there's no chariots, there's just infantry, to archaeological evidence from the Hyksos that there are chariots and that there's this program of developing chariots. It's probably why the Hyksos were so successful, to be honest. It's because they had that mobile archery platform. So the occurrence of the chariot in Egypt is very, very well documented. And it's really starting with the Hyksos that we start seeing the chariot being used ubiquitously in Egypt. So we're going from a state of showing the positive evidence of warfare, where it's just infantry, to the positive evidence to where there's both infantry and chariotry. So it's very, very clear that the chariot was introduced around 1666 or maybe a little later, but it's around that point in time. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Okay. Next question is from Ramada Driver. And by the way, thank you very much for your support. Your interaction with my critics has been very, very much appreciated, and I'm so grateful for that, because you point out some excellent points, especially regarding the dictionary fallacy. I think that was very, very well observed. Okay. And this is going to be a quick question, unfortunately, because this is a very simple answer. I really want more and more information about these tablets. I did read the peer-reviewed article today. Fascinating. Dr. Falk, is there anything in the tablets that has the Amorite word for virgin? Unfortunately not. It isn't a huge tablet. It is a small tablet, but it has a lot of stuff on it. I mean, it's a very condensed tablet for what it is. But unfortunately, it doesn't have a complete dictionary set, and unfortunately, virgin is not in it. So, unfortunately, I'm going to have to say, no, it doesn't have that word. But what it does have is super exciting. I mean, we are going to get a lot out of this. It's got several verb forms. It's got several syntactical constructions. Boy, it's an exciting piece of text. It is an exciting piece of text. but unfortunately it does not uncover version. Nevertheless, I want to thank you very much for your support, and thank you for this question. It's a great question, but I wanted to give you an answer for this. So, thank you very much for the question. Our next question here is from Chow Yi. Thank you very much for this question. How historical do you think King Abgar V corresponds with Jesus is? Okay, King Abgar V was a king that reigned from roughly the 1st century BC until about 50 AD. And there's an apocryphal letter that basically has him corresponding with Jesus. Now, scholars in general do not think that this is a credible letter. And I would sort of concur with that opinion. Now, frankly, here's one of the things about patristics. These things can change on a dime. You know, I remember back when people were saying that Thomas's trip to India was so outlandish, and it had talked about 2 kings of India that nobody had ever heard of. So it had to be apocryphal. And then archaeologists pulled out 2 coins with the names of those kings, and it was just like, oh, maybe this account of Thomas isn't apocryphal. Maybe it's the most credible. So as I said, these things can change on a complete dime. But right now, what we know of the at least the provenance of Abgar V's letters, and say the timing of all this, it seems improbable. And that's where I'll leave it. I won't say it's impossible. I won't say, but it does seem improbable that his particular correspondence is basically been manufactured. Now, I think his successors were definitely Christian, and I definitely think his successors were followers of Jesus Christ. But King Abgar V, I've got my doubts. Okay? So, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for the question. I hope that helped. You got to take every one of these sort of letters on a case-by-case basis. Some of them are going to be legitimate. Some of them are not. And you have to sort of judge to see what's likely, what's credible. The language of these letters will often sort of give you a hint which way to go on this. You know? So, anyway, thank you very much for the question. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, brick creation. And this will be our last non-super chat before we get into super chats. Is the mention of Tubal-Cain being a craftsman with iron and bronze, Genesis 4:2, Cicero's iron chariots, Judges 4:3, problematic? Would it be anachronistic since iron was crafted in the Iron Age sometime? Okay. We have got to understand, okay, these are 2 separate questions. Let's parse this. Okay? Tubal-Cain. Tubal-Cain is not just an ancestor. It's also a regional designation, with basically part of Israelite ethnomy. You look at the basically how Israel sort of views the world. It views it by ethnicity and tribes and basically sort of ethnic designations. Tubal-Cain is very much what we would call Turkey today. This is what we would call Turkey. So what they're doing is doing a retrojection. They're doing a retrojection and basically saying that, you know, they're not saying that the literal Tubal-Cain, the pre-flood Tubal-Cain, developed iron, the craft of iron and bronze. What they're saying is that the area where Tubal-Cain settled is now today known for iron and bronze. So they're doing a retrojection here in Genesis 4:22. And retrojection is all through Genesis. So we have to kind of expect this. Okay? Now, Sisera's iron chariots, Judges 4:3, are different. Sisera is part of the Heiser Confederacy. Heiser had been destroyed, but still the kingdom of Heiser was in place, maybe in another town, but it had still maintained its kingdom integrity, despite being destroyed by Deborah. So we have to understand that Heiser as a kingdom had strong trade ties with the Hittite Empire. They were part of that sort of Amorite kingdom that also had trading ties with Mari and the Hittites. And the Hittites had iron since the early 2nd millennium. So long before ironcraft came into Canaan, the Hittites were already manufacturing iron goods. So we aren't told where Sisera gets his iron chariots from. And that's an important detail. Because it would be different if it said, well, Sisera made iron chariots, or his craftsmen made iron chariots. But the fact is that the Hittites were selling iron implements all over the place. This was an important trade point for the Hittites. So Sisera, being, say, part of that Heiser Confederacy, would have easily had trade connections with the Hittite Empire, and thus been able to buy himself iron chariots, or at least the components to make iron chariots. So the fact is that the Iron Age occurs at different times in different places. Like, for example, it's very early on, as I said, it's early 2nd millennium in the Hittite Empire. It's a little later in Canaan, and then it's even later in Egypt. So, like, for example, in Canaan, the Iron Age doesn't occur until the 12th century BC. It doesn't occur in Egypt until the 10th century BC. So you've got the Iron Age is not ubiquitous across all the ancient Near East. It occurs differently at different times for different specific regions. As I said, earlier for the Hittites, a little later for the Canaanites, and then later again for the Egyptians. So it is very, very likely that Sisera imported these iron chariots for the use of his army. So anyway, thank you very much for the question. I hope that answered the question, and I very much appreciate it. Okay. We're now going to get into the super chats here. Our first super chat here is from Andrew Cahill for $10. Thank you very much for super chat. In a previous live stream, somebody mentioned an inscription with the name Jerubbaal. Can you go into a little more detail explaining the context, dating, and where it was found, and why you think it's Gideon? Okay. I can't remember exactly where it's found off the top of my head. It was not in the specific area where Gideon was sort of ruled. So it's not in Judah or anywhere around there. I'd have to look up again where it is, because it's just not something on the top of my head here. But the issue comes around the name Jerubbaal, which means let Baal, the god Baal, contend with him. And that's a very, very interesting name. Very interesting. Because Jerubbaal is not a name you'd give a child. It's not a flattering name. It's not a compliment. Okay? It's basically a name that you would give it to someone who's... And you hear the story, for example, in Judges, where Gideon destroys the ephod. He destroys the idol. And the townspeople are furious. They're absolutely furious. And they go up to him and they go up to his father and say, "Control your son." And Gideon's father says, "Well, Jerubbaal, let Baal deal with him. Okay, you guys think that Baal is such a great god? Let him deal with Gideon." So this is not a name you give your kid. Okay, this is a nickname you earn. Okay, okay. So, given that the amount of people that would actually have that as a given name are very small. We find, for example, the name Nabal. Nabal means fool. Okay, Abigail's husband in the text is recorded as Nabal. Now, nobody would be given the name Nabal no mother gives their child the name Nabal. Nabal's the name you earned. Okay, you're not born with the name fool. Okay, and likewise, Gideon was not born with the name Jerubbaal. He's given that name, and that's as a result of how he behaves. And as a result, the chances of when you've got a given name like that, as opposed to a name that you are born with, the chances of a shard having that name applying to some other random person is a lot smaller. So it comes down to statistics. It comes down to probability. And given that there's very low probability that anyone would give their kid the name Jerubbaal, the likelihood then that this is Gideon goes way up. So anyway, that's my thinking behind this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, the next super chat here comes from Andrew Cahill for $10. Thank you very much, super chat. In grad school or earlier, did you ever participate in any fieldwork, either excavation and epigraphy? Yes, I did very, very briefly participate at the excavation at Tel El Borg. If so, where did you work and what was your best story from those days? Okay, I actually worked off-site. So I was working with arrowheads and javelin points. So for me, it was much more dealing with sort of the data after the fact. So while I did participate in the excavation, I was not there on site. You have to understand that most of what I did was basically, I'm a literary scholar. I do most of my work behind the scenes. So for me, I will work with artifacts. Like, for example, if they recover artifacts, I will examine them and I will do analyses of artifacts. I'm not really a digger. Okay, I don't do on-site excavations. That's not part of what I specialize in. I'm more of a specialist in, say, antiquities, objects of material culture, like arrowheads, like furniture, jewelry, that sort of thing. So I'm more into objects. I'm more into objects than actually digging away things. So once they dig them up, then yeah, okay, I'm in my glory here, and that's where I dig. So that's where I really do most of my work. So I'm not really in the field, and as I said, the archaeological field where I actually go to a site and I dig. And frankly, you get scholars of all different varieties in this field. You get some who are diggers, field archaeologists. You do get some who are, say, textual scholars. The field has a huge diversity of different roles, and I'm more fit into that, more the scholarly end of this than actually the practical field archaeology end of this. So I hope that answered your question. Thank you for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. And he follows this up with a second super chat. Thank you very much for the super chat. Just in case your answer to my previous question is no, sorry, if it was no, but I try to give you something anyway. I'll also ask, what existing field projects, excavation, or epigraphy, I need to slow down, would you want to join most given the chance? Oh boy, I can tell you. Okay, this one I can tell you. I'm so envious of James Hoffmeyer right now. He's right now in Sudan, digging at the mortuary temple of Taharqa. I would so love to be on that dig. It's not even funny. When I heard he was going there and I got left behind, it was just like, oh, really? That is, I would love, I would give my left arm to go on that dig. You know, that is the the chance to go and dig at the funerary temple of Taharqa would just be just fabulous. Fabulous. Okay. 25th dynasty, you know, not just mortuary temple, but a pyramid. There's a pyramid there. Excavation around the site. And what's cool about Sudan, unlike Egypt, is you can bring some stuff home. Okay? Digging in Sudan is super special. It's not like digging in Egypt. It's not like digging in Israel. And it's not like digging in Jordan. All those countries have strict antiquities laws, where if you find anything at all, you can't take it with you home. So, what this means is that you can't bring materials home to teach. So you don't have any teaching examples. Sudan is one of the few countries that still allows you to take artifacts of minor archaeological significance, like pot shards, home to teach. Essentially, frankly, they don't have the facilities to house pot shards anyway. So for them, this is they can preserve it without them having to fork out the expense. So yeah, Sudan would be a cool place to dig. Totally awesome place to dig, especially if you're on an authorized dig. So that's the one dig I'd love to be on right now. Absolutely would love it. So I obviously won't be able to be on that dig because it's happening right now. But if I could be on that dig, I would. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Our next super chat is from the Camelopard for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Which Bronze Age nations peoples are representing in the Japhethites of Genesis 10, 1 through 5? All right, let's pull up the text. Bible here. Genesis 10, 1 through 5. Now, these are the records of the generations of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, the sons of Noah, and the sons were born to them after the flood. The sons of Japheth were Gomer and Magog, Madai and Javan, Tubal and Meshesh and Tiresh. And the sons of Gomer were Ashkenaz and Rephah and Togarmah. And the sons of Japheth were Elisha and Tirshish, Kittim and Donanim. And from these coastlines of the nations were separated into lands, each one according to their language, according to the families and their nations. Okay. Now, this is part of what's called the Table of Nations, which is how mankind separated after the flood. Now, of the three lines, the lines of Ham, lines of Shem, and the lines of Japheth, we've got the least details about the line of Japheth, the so-called Japhethites. Okay? But we are given some evidence here. Now, of the names that we have here, Magog, that's Turkey. And Madai is probably very, very close by. So Madai would be, say, Eastern Turkey. The Tarshish, that's Spain. Kittim and Donanim, we're talking now about the Greek islands. Okay, so the nations here are basically going from, say, the Caucasus. They're spreading into Turkey, and they're crossing across the southern European coast, north coast of the Mediterranean. And they're settling all the way to Spain. And that's cool right here that it mentions Tarshish, because Tarshish is well known. That's Spain. So we are definitely getting a representation of, say, the Indo-European peoples that are settling across Northern Europe, or sorry, Southern Europe, and they're going to spread up into Northern Europe too. So that's sort of the Bronze Age peoples that are being represented here is Southern European, Northern Mediterranean coastal people, basically going from Caucasus into to Turkey and Anatolia, and then into the Greek Isles, and then through the Italy and Spain. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Really, really much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here. All right, yeah, that's right. Okay, from Jen P17 for $3. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is the context of the second commandment? Let's look up what the second commandment is. Again, it would have been really, really helpful if you had included a verse here, because the second commandment is going to, how you name the second commandment here is going to vary by tradition. Some traditions are going to basically say, are going to number these commandments differently. So I've got to kind of take a guess here because you didn't include the verse, which commandment you mean. So, nope. Sorry, no verse, not enough characters. Okay, if you put it in if you put it in live stream right now, I'll know which verse. So tell me which verse. I'll wait for 10 seconds, and while I pull up my Bible here, I'm going to assume you're taking it from Exodus 20. All right. So which one is it? I can see you in the live stream here. Okay, GNP17. So, okay. Well, you shall have known. I believe you mean without any other context here. Okay. You shall not. Okay. You're talking verse 4. Awesome. Okay, great one. All right. Verse 4. You shall not make yourself an idol or any likeness of what is in the heaven above, or on the earth below, or on the water under the earth. You shall not worship them or serve them. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of fathers on the children, on the third and fourth generation, on those who hate me, but showing loving kindness to thousands to those who love me and keep my commandments. Okay. Now, the particular... hey, GNP70, don't worry about it. It happens. Don't worry about it. We're good. Don't cry. Okay. We're good. Okay. Here is the idea of making an idol. Okay. And an idol is something very, very specific in the ancient Near East. An idol in the Old Testament context. Now, it's going to change for the New Testament, and we won't get into that because that's different again. An idol in the Old Testament context is you're building a proxy body for a god, and then you're trapping him in it. Okay? You're building this idol, you're trapping the spirit of the god in the idol, and then you're either keeping him there by coercion or because you're treating him so well he doesn't want to leave. And then you're sort of appeasing him to get what you want, or you're extorting him to get you what you want. And whichever one that is will depend on what culture you're from. In the ancient Near East, this sort of differed. Like, for example, in Egypt. In Egypt, you treat your gods really, really well, their idols really, really well, so that they would be happy and give you blessings and wouldn't be vindictive against you. In Canaan, you trapped the gods in an idol and then you extorted them because they're trapped to give you what you want. So that's the context of this commandment. Is you're essentially making an idol to manipulate God. And what the commandment here is telling you is Yahweh isn't like that. He can't be manipulated. So don't create an idol to think you can even manipulate me. So that's what he is saying here. Is you can't manipulate Yahweh. Yahweh's beyond manipulation. He is absolutely sovereign and absolutely holy. So this is very, very different than the gods of the ancient Near East. Yahweh is a God that is beyond all other gods. He never sleeps. He's holy. He's always sovereign and always on the throne. And because of that, he cannot be manipulated in the same way as, say, the other gods of the ancient Near East. So that is the context of what's going on here. So don't make yourself any idol of anything above the earth, that's in heaven, or in the earth below, or in the water. Because they're all second-rate gods. So I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very, very much appreciate it. Our next super chat here is from GNP17 again for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Can you explain what's happening with the lying spirit in 1 Kings 22, 20 to 23? Sure. Let's pull up our Bible again. And we'll go to 1 Kings 22, verse 23. Oh my gosh. We just are getting an inundation of super chats here. I did not expect this. Okay. Verse 20. Sorry, I'm a little overshot this a little. Okay. I'll start verse 19 just for hopefully maybe because. And Micaiah said, "Therefore hear the word of the Lord. I saw the Lord sitting on his throne, and all the host of heaven standing by him on his right and left. And the Lord said, who will entice Ahab to go and fall at Ramoth Gilead?" And one said this, while another said that. So you got sort of, what we have here is kind of a Heiser-esque council of gods going on here. Verse 21. Then a spirit came forward and stood before the Lord and said, "I will entice him." And the Lord said, "How?" And he said, "I will go out and be a deceiving spirit in the mouth of all his prophets." And then he said, "You are to entice him and also prevail. Go and do so. Now therefore, behold, the Lord has put a deceiving spirit in the mouth of all these prophets, and the Lord has proclaimed disaster against you." Okay. Theologians call this one of those difficult passages. How can the Lord send a deceiving spirit? Now, one of the things we have to be careful of here is understanding the difference between primary and secondary causes. Primary causes are essentially those causes that God himself absolutely ordains. He basically says, "I ordain this and it will happen." This is not quite a primary cause. This is more along the line of a secondary cause. And if you read the Westminster Confession, it sort of delineates this really, really well, which is that God ordains all things, but he doesn't cause all things. Those things that are primary causes, God ordains and causes. Those are secondary causes, God allows, ordains in that he allows it, but he didn't cause it. This is how we reconcile, for example, human beings doing evil, and yet it's still within the sovereignty of God. There's a limit to what men can do as far as their evil goes, but that limit is within the purview of God himself. So God ordains it in the respect that he allows it to happen, even though he doesn't condone it. So what we have here with the lying spirit is that there's a call, there's a need for Ahab to go and fall at Ramoth Gilead. But God opens it up to the council of gods, of spirits, to say, okay, how do you want to execute this? He's giving that autonomy to that council. And one spirit steps up to the plate and say, hey, I'll do it. I want to do some evil. Let me do it. And God says, all right. How are you going to do this? I'm going to put lying words into the mouths of the prophets. Okay. Go do it. God's not necessarily approving of it, but it's within the sovereign will that he allows it. So these spirits are acting as secondary causes. So this is how we reconcile this passage, is that these lying spirits are acting as secondary causes, ordained, but within sort of the divine purview of what God would allow, yet not necessarily condoned. And we know from what we understand of the divine council that the divine council did not do what they were always told. They're acting as agents, often outside of the sovereign will of God, the perfect will of God, even though it's within the ordained will. So anyway, I hope that explains this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Our next super chat is from Cole Walker for $10. Thank you very much for super chat. I'd like to sponsor a non-super chat. Well, excellent. And we have selected here Mr. Rich B.O.B. It's question: did the Egyptians have codices or only scrolls, or for books thinking of Coptic binding? Okay, this is going to be a quick one. So thank you very much for the question. The Egyptians did not have codices until the reign of Julius Caesar. Our first codices that we discovered, that we know of, was invented during the reign of Julius Caesar. Now, I did an article on paper and book binding that never did get published, but it was one of my first attempts at a peer-reviewed article. So I looked at all of this. And the earliest codices that we have are early Roman, basically the Roman period, that sort of, as I said, that during that reign of Julius Caesar. But once Julius Caesar invents the codice, it sort of spreads everywhere. Now, one of the things with Egyptian books is that the codice was not a great binding for papyrus. There are some papyrus codices that have survived from the early Roman period. But one of the problems with papyrus codices is they tend to chip at the edges. Papyrus is very, very fragile at the edges, which is one of the reasons why our paper today has large margins. Okay. Papyrus had very, very large margins, and that's because to prevent chipping at the edge of the paper, at the edge of the papyrus. This also had a problem with the binding process of a codex. Like, for those who don't understand what a codex is, a codex is what we call a modern bound book today. I'll just grab one here. Okay? This is a codex. This is the Mari Archives. Okay, but it's a codex. It has a binding along the back that binds a bunch of pages. That's a codex. Okay? As opposed to a scroll, which is for the demonstration here, which is a single piece of writing medium that's just rolled up. That's a scroll. Okay? So that's the difference between the two for those who don't understand. Prior to, say, Julius Caesar, and especially in Egypt, most books were on scrolls. In the case of Egyptian papyrus, this was a practical matter to prevent things from falling apart. In the case of, say, parchment, Parchment was easily adaptable to the codex. So most of the codexes we have today are basically written on parchment. So the Egyptians really did not have a lot of codices until really into the Roman period. So this is sort of just a historical matter, and it's also a matter of writing media as well. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. The Coptic binding that you know well basically came about when they started using parchment instead, especially in the Sinai Peninsula, for St. Catherine's Monastery. They'll use a lot of codices because they're using a lot of parchment instead of papyrus. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Our next super chat here is from Andrew Guler for $10. Thank you very much, super chat. Happy New Year, Dr. Falk. Well, Happy New Year to you too. When Thor Heyerdahl built an Egyptian reed boat and sailed to Latin America, do you think he proved the Egyptians were able to get to the New World? Ooh, okay, interesting. Now, there's two factors here, two issues here. Now, I remember as a kid, seeing that documentary with Heyerdahl and building that Egyptian reed boat. And, I think he did prove that the Egyptians could get there. But it's more the matter of, did they get there? Could they get there? Could be. Did they get there? That's a different matter. We don't have huge amounts of records of the Egyptians actually building reed boats because of the amount of reeds involved. We do have a lot of evidence of Egyptian wood boats. Now, we do know that wood was scarce in Egypt, that they had to import it, but what they did import was often used for building boats. And that's because it was so important for the trade routes of Egypt. The fact is that reed boats are not long-lived. Even though it might have survived a trip across the Atlantic, it would not have survived much more after that. So I think that's a problem with his hypothesis that they actually could have made it across. Now, could they have? Yeah, it's possible. It's theoretically possible with the right navigational equipment and knowledge, they could have probably made it across. But I don't think they did so. And I don't think it would have been very practical. He basically went over there during fair weather, and the Atlantic is known for having terrible, terrible storms. I don't think a reed boat would have done so well across there. And the fact is that the evidence that we have from ancient Egypt seems to be against the whole idea of reed boats being built. They did seem to tend more towards wood boats, and we got lots of evidence now. For example, the boats we find around the Pyramid at Khufu, the boats we found at the Red Sea cache. We got now several evidence. There's even boats found at a First Dynasty tomb. There's a First Dynasty tomb, and I can't remember which king it was, but there's like 23 boats buried there, and they're all made of wood. So it seems that the Egyptians preferred wood construction for the building of their boats. So while it's theoretically possible to make a reed boat, I don't think they practically did that for the purposes of large sailing vessels. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Our next super chat here is from Andrew Guler for $10. Thank you very much for super chat. What independent verification existed in the first century to fact-check the Davidic genealogy of Joseph and Mary presented by Matthew and Luke? Ooh, okay. That's going to be an issue right there. The independent fact-checking is the line of David. We do know that the line of David is consistent and unbroken from David until the Babylonian exile. And then it's the descendant of David that becomes governor of Judea after the Persians conquered the Babylonians. And that's Zerubbabel. And it's from there that we sort of have to take it on as that this is their line, that they are descended from the, say, the Davidic genealogy. We don't have independent confirmation of that genealogy. But at the same time, too, it does seem to be fairly consistent as far as this what that genealogy goes. Now, there's a difference between the genealogies of Matthew and Luke, and I have yet to look into that exactly. But at least the genealogy is confirmed up to Zerubbabel. After that, it gets a little hazy, but that's sort of be expected too. Like, for example, the whole connection between Ruth and Boaz and David himself. Well, we don't have independent confirmation of that either, but that is sort of the Davidic line that's been preserved by at least the local tradition or maybe the family itself. So I think what we have here is either a local tradition or what's preserved by the family itself. So we don't have, we after Zerubbabel, difficult to fact check because nobody was fact checking it then. After Zerubbabel, really nobody really cared who Zerubbabel's descendants were. So because of that, it's going to be very, very difficult to fact check that overall. So we sort of have to take that as either, let's just say, local tradition or, say, family tradition, that this is their family line. So anyway, that's the best I can give you here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Our next super chat from Andrew Guler for $20. Thank you very much, super chat. Do you think the Balaam of Deir Allah inscriptions is the same Balaam of Numbers? Absolutely it is. In both cases, this Balaam is identified as Balaam, son of Beor. Okay, so it's definitely the same guy. It's definitely the same guy. Now, the Deir Allah inscription is 500 years later. The events are probably different or changed. That inscription was found in Jordan. So, basically, in the region of Moab. Which is very, very interesting because he was supposed to be a prophet that operated in Moab. So that's very provocative and interesting right there. So absolutely, I do think it's the same dude. Definitely the same dude. But the events of each, of his life as it recorded in Numbers versus Deir Allah inscription may be different. Basically based upon how that person is remembered over time. Now, I will say this. The account of Balaam, son of Beor, in Numbers is probably closer in propinquity, in span of time, to the events than what we find in the Deir Allah inscription. So I have more tendency to side with Numbers here over the Deir Allah. But it's definitely referring to the same guy. So anyway, I hope that answers your super chat. Very much appreciate it, and thank you very much for super chat. Okay, our next super chat is from Andrew Gouler for $20. Thank you very much, super chat. A YouTube reviewer said that the mummy takes place in the 1920s because that was the golden age of archaeology. Is that true? If so, why? Well, yes. It does take place in the 1920s. The original Mummy with Boris Karloff was filmed in 1932. And in 1932, they were already looking at the 1920s as being the golden age. Now, we have to understand in 1922 was the year that King Tutankhamun was discovered. So that really sort of caused Egyptology to be just create a fascination in the press. people were both really, really interested and really, really excited about ancient Egypt in the early 1920s. And that's because all of those discoveries with King Tut were just coming into the fore. Okay, they were just coming into the fore. And every week, new pictures from King Tut's tomb would come out. And Faye of the Duet says, Mummy 1999 is my favorite movie in Canada. Changed my mind. Okay, yeah, all right. I'll admit, even I love The Mummy of 1999. But The Mummy of 1999 is hearkening back to the historical context of The Mummy of 1932. It's doing homage to that by setting it in the same historical context. I mean, that paddle boat, the dress, I mean, all that's 1920s garb. Okay, so so it's definitely set in the 1920s. So, but again, it's again that this was a day and age when people were super interested in Egypt. Now that changes in the 1930s with World War II. World War II, people were no longer interested in Egypt. They were interested in what was happening in Germany. And we don't need to go there. In fact, it was so bad, the sort of what World War II did to Egyptian sort of interest in Egypt, that when Monte found those king's tombs at Tanis, he got no press at all. People were just not interested because of what was happening in Europe during World War II. So, absolutely, Mummy takes place in the 1920s. That's the setting of it for the Boris Karloff film. And it's true of the Mummy of 1999 too. It's all set in the 1920s just because of that sort of that particular interest and special, very special time in Egypt. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it, and thank you for the question. Okay, we have a question here from Addison Weir for $9.99. Thank you very much for super chat. Gotta love how Dan McClellan thinks, quote, I apologize to those whom I offend, end quote, is the same as saying, I'm sorry if you were offended, end quote. Yeah, I know. Yeah, I know. Look, these guys want their pound of flesh. And they will misquote anything you say to try to get that pound of flesh. Yeah, my apology was to those whom I offended. Okay? All right. Not if I offended you, but...
Nor did you say I owe you.
Yeah. And nor did I say I owe you an apology. But if you were offended and I offended you, I apologize. Okay? That's who it was defended, though. Those who I offended. And I don't think I have to go any further than that. That's an apology. And that's a proper apology. You know, that's... I mean, what more you want? Really? I mean, come on. All right. Anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And we'll move on to the next one here. Asking Weir again for $4.99. Thank you very much, super chat. I think you're going to have to make another sequel to Kip is a vile clown who wants to rule the road, end quote. Well, I can't say what the popcorn will or will not do. The popcorn has a mind of its own. And the popcorn's kind of getting agitated over this. So, it's always possible. Anything can happen with popcorn. Could be. Right. And he follows up with two other questions here that I think are interesting or important as well. Okay? Which is, now that Vancouver cut ties with you, how is that going to affect your livelihood? Okay. It's going to affect it in some ways, but not others. The first thing is that this was not a paid position. VST never paid me for being a research associate. It was a it was basically, it allowed me to be part of an academic community where I could use their library and I could contribute to their scholarly discourse. So it was kind of a quid pro quo. They gave me library access. I gave them research. Okay? So, how is this going to affect me? Well, it's going to cut off my library access. It's going to cut off my ability to use them as a mailing address, etc., etc. So there are some logistical benefits that I'm going to lose out of this. The more important problem, though, that this represents for me is that they've gone after some of my editors. They've basically gone to some of my editors and tried to deplatform me in other ways. Basically go to some of my editors and say, don't ever accept any publication from this guy ever again. That's the more important concern. Yeah, cutting me off from VST. Okay, I lose my library access. Fair enough. I got other means of getting library access. No big deal. But and those sort of axes they can't touch. They can't touch it. But the cutting me off with my editors, spoiling my relationship with my editors, that's affecting my livelihood, because then I can't sell books, I can't publish articles, and that's an attempt to not just deplatform me, but to silence me altogether. Okay, so silencing me because of something that they took out of context is entirely reprehensible. It's totally reprehensible. And it's just a symptom of our cancel culture today. We are quickly becoming a shame culture. It's not what you intended that counts. It's what we think you did that counts. And shame cultures are not grounded in solid morality. So that's all I'm going to say on that. And I think that's, yeah, we're becoming a shame culture. Rapidly.
Shame.
Oh, my producer should say what is a shame culture. Okay.
It's not what most people think.
Yeah. Basically, there's a difference. The anthropologists make the difference between, say, a guilt culture and a shame culture. A guilt culture is you're guilty because you know you've done wrong and you are guilty of it. There's an objective reality that you've done something wrong. You know you're guilty of it. You intended it to be wrong. There's mens res, evil mind. A shame culture is where you are what other people perceive you to be. Whether or not you actually intended it, whether or not you had mens res, whether or not you are actually guilty.
Whether or not you actually did what you
Whether or not you actually did what you're accused of. A shame culture will say, you are guilty of this. We are in woke culture, cancel culture, we are becoming a shame culture. We used to be a guilt culture. We are rapidly becoming a shame culture. And that is really, really dangerous for society. And Dan McClellan and his goons want to push a shame culture agenda. All to grind a ideological axe. That's very, very dangerous. Very, very dangerous. And it leads to really bad places. So anyway, with that said, I'm going to end the question here. Thank you very much for the question. Really much appreciate. Our next question here is also from Addison Ware. Kip Davis apparently insists on watching your, quote, idiotic Q&A sessions every Friday. Is he obsessed? Well, First of all, he has to do it with a soccer count. Okay? I saw it. Okay, he was banned. He was banned from this channel for bad behavior. Okay, so he's not actually allowed on this channel. So he's on here with a sock account. Second, he's been trying to do this for over a year. Okay? You figure that my live streams are 3-4 hours, and we've been going now for 52-ish weeks since that. He's been putting over 200 hours of view time just to select one soundbite. Is that obsessed? I think so. I can think of a whole lot of better ways to spend 200 hours. I wouldn't spend 200 hours watching his stuff. It's not worth it. So, if he's watching, hi, Kip. Hope you're enjoying it. Yeah. So, yeah, I would think he'd had better things to do with his time. Honestly. But he doesn't. So, there he is. Okay. So, the next super chat is from Addison Ware for 199. Having a few non-super chats. Short of money? Okay. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. We have been really blessed tonight, and I really, really appreciate everyone who's given us a super chat tonight. Very, very much appreciate it. It does help our channel, especially during this difficult time. We so appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Okay, our next super chat here is from Zeo Bayo for 55 euros. Thank you very much for that really, really generous super chat. Really very much appreciate it. Hi, Dr. Falk. We're with you. I wanted to ask Heiser this, but alas, yeah, do pray for the Heiser family right now. He's in stage 4 terminal pancreatic cancer. He doesn't have long to live. Please, please pray for the Heiser family right now. And pray for Dr. Heiser. He's got, last I heard, he's got days to weeks to live. So please pray for him and his family. So, but alas, isn't the man in Mark 8:22 being literal in seeing men like trees? Random guy off the street telling parables reminds me of DMT gestures, but wouldn't know what a gesture hat is. Okay, let's pull up that passage from Mark. And let's give that a read. Okay, Mark 22. Okay. Starting verse 22 here. And they came to Bethsaida, and they brought a blind man to him, this is Jesus, and entreated him to touch him. And taking the blind man by the hand, he brought out the village, and after spitting on his eyes and laying his hands upon him, he asked, "Do you see anything?" And he looked up and said, "I see men, for I am seeing them like trees walking about." Then he laid his hands upon his eyes, and he looked intently and was restored, and began to see everything clearly. And he sent him home, saying, "Do not enter the village." End quote. Okay. So basically what he's basically saying is that, okay, you got verse 23. So Jesus spits on his eyes. And this is a guy who's blind. He has no sight at all. He's got no sight at all. He spits on the eyes. And he asks him, "Do you see anything?" Okay. And the guy goes, "Well, I see people, but they're like trees." So he's basically telling you that he's not seeing them in fully articulated form, but kind of like say tree trunks moving around. Okay. So he's not being literal here. And we can tell that from the passage, like trees. Okay, seeing men like trees. So the blind man knows he's seeing men, but he's not seeing them clearly. They're like tree trunks moving around. Okay? And then Jesus puts his hands on his eyes again, and then suddenly he can see clear. Now, this does have some interesting ramifications, but probably the most important one here is that the peeling process is, in this case, gradated. There's a point where Christ heals the retinas, because probably this guy is suffering from vitamin A deficiency, which caused him to be blind in the retina. So he heals the eyes by, through the process of spitting on him, but then has to touch his eyes again to basically open them up, so that he suddenly gets his sight back, and he's trying to learn even how to focus. He's trying to learn even how to focus. So it's not being literal here. He's using this in figurative terms, but he's using it the best way he can describe it. So, he's not telling a parable here. This is not a parable. This is a historical account of a healing. And the blind man is using an analogy, basically a simile, to tell you how to relate to Christ what he is seeing as he first opens his eyes. And then Christ completes the healing. So that, and really this is kind of interesting right here. I mean, this is a fascinating healing, because it's basically, well, what would a blind man see when they first opens their eyes? If they see guys walking around like tree trunks after having no vision at all, I mean, first of all, that's a huge improvement. But it also gives you the blind man's perspective in this. This gives credence to the healing. It gives credence to it, because it kind of shows you in this sort of gradated healing how the perspective of the blind man legitimizes the healing. So, I mean, it's a fascinating account, but it's by no means a parable. It is a simile. So, anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, our next super chat here is from Cataphract3 for $5. Thank you very much, super chat. Do the Amorite tablets impact the theory of Israel emerging from Canaan as opposed to the Exodus, in your opinion, i.e. the Hill People uprising theory? It doesn't impact it so much, because the Amorites, there were Amorites in Canaan, there were Amorites in Egypt. The Amorites did very much get around. So this isn't something that's going to affect the Exodus so much. It will affect the origins of Hebrew. Okay. It will very much affect the idea that Hebrew came from Canaanite languages. Okay. So you could still possibly posit that Amorite communities in Canaan were the origins of the Israelites, especially that northern kingdom of the Amorites from Byblos to the the Arnon. But that would be sort of the limit of it. You couldn't say at this point, though, that the Israelites emerged from southern Canaan, because there was much less Amorite influence down there. So you could still postulate that Israelite came from northern Canaan or from Egypt, but that sort of limits your possibilities thanks to these Amorite tablets. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated, and I hope that helped. Billy Ningen for $20. Thank you very much for the super chat. Good evening, Dr. Falk. Happy tablet night. Well, happy tablet night to you, too. Would the discovery of the Amorite Tablets, particularly the Amorite version of El, undermine the theory that the early Israelites adopted the El cult from Canaan? God bless. Yes, it would. This it would undermine. Because Hebrew has its association with the Amorite civilization, and Hebrew is now a direct descendant of the Amoritic language, it would also basically undermine the idea that the El cult came from Canaan. So it's very clear at this point that, say, the El cult came from the Amorite culture. So, yeah, absolutely would undermine that. So anyway, I hope that I helped answer the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Billing in for $5. Thank you very much, super chat. Dr. Falk, considering your relationship with Dr. Hoffmeyer, do we know if he did the consulting in the movie Prince of Egypt? As far as I know, he did not consult for that movie. He doesn't tell me really what movies he consults, if he ever does consult movies. As far as I know, he doesn't. He's not big on movie consulting. I do more movie consulting, I think, than he does, in all honesty. But I'm unaware if he actually consulted on that movie. As far as I know, he didn't, but he didn't tell me one way or the other. So I can't answer that question for or against. But he never mentioned it, as far as I know. But he has told me about some things he has consulted on. He does a lot of documentaries. He does an awful lot of documentaries. Whereas I do very, very few documentaries. So I don't think he did a consultation for Prince of Egypt, but I'm not exactly sure either. So anyway, that's the best I can give you here. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay. Sorry if I butcher this. Rorik for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hey, Dr. Falk. Is it possible that we could get a video in the future on lost cities in the ancient Near East, such as Akkad or Ichitawe? Yeah. Yeah, sure. Anything's possible. I mean, we always take a lot of suggestions for videos from our subscriber base. And we've always done that. So we could easily add this to our file of ideas. So it's a little difficult to do videos on a lost city because we don't have evidence for it. It's a lot easier to do videos on cities that we have evidence for. So some of these are going to be a lot easier to talk about than others. And he continues, would like to hear your opinion on where you think they are. Now, some like Ichitawi, we have now, because of, say, the satellite telemetry of Sarparkak, we actually have a pretty good idea where Ichitawi was. Akkad's a different story because we don't have the satellite data. Now, will they start excavating Ichitawi sometime in the future? Who knows? But we have a pretty good idea where it is now. And it's on the outskirts of the Fayum. So we know where that is now. Even though we haven't done any excavations of the site. So, anyway, I hope that helps. I hope that answers the question. And I hope that we get some more data that we can actually do meaningful videos about these things. So we'll add these to the ideal list and we'll see where we go from there. Anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Our next super chat is from Polycart Salvaretia for $19.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Sorry about what happened. I appreciate that. Thank you very much. We do appreciate all the prayers and basically moral support that we get from our community. I hope this misunderstanding doesn't cause you to lose credibility. Well, you know, God is in control. God is absolutely in control. And it's up to him, ultimately. And he goes on, now Josh Bowen and Kip Davis are on a slander campaign. Is popcorn coming out? Well, I can't comment on the popcorn. The popcorn will do what it does. Okay? We haven't decided one way or the other. It's too early for this. It's too early for this. Okay? But we do appreciate all the moral and emotional support that we are getting from our subscribers, and we are very, very deeply appreciated for everyone who has been helping us, who's consoled us, who's prayed for us, who's been there for us throughout this entire ordeal. So thank you very much for that super chat. Thank you very much for your condolences and your sympathy, and we really, really appreciate it. Thank you so very much. The next super chat here is from Billy Ningen for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Contradictions between Numbers 14:30 and 26:52. It seems to be at first God just gave the land to Caleb and Joshua, and the rest died in the wilderness, and then God allotted the land to the tribes. All right, let's pull up the Bible. Now, the difference here is going to be context, and this is what hugely matters in this case. So, Numbers 14:30. We'll go up a little bit. All right, I'll start with verse 28 here. Say to them, as I live, says the Lord, just as you have spoken in my hearing, so I will surely do you. Your corpses will fall in this wilderness, even all your numbered men, according to your complete number, from 20 years old and upward, who have grumbled against me. Surely you shall not come into the land which I have sworn to you to settle you, except Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua son of Nun. 31. Your children, however, whom you said would become a prey, I will bring them in, and they shall know the land which you have rejected. Okay. The context of chapter 14 is when the 12 spies are sent into the promised land. Only 2 come back with a faithful report. Joshua and Nun. The other 10 spies say, oh, no, it's full of giants, can't go in there, we're afraid. And all the Israelites say, oh, we can't go in there, we're afraid. God says, okay, you're going to die in the wilderness. All of you are going to die in the wilderness. You're not coming in. You've rejected the promised land I prepared for you. So you're not coming in the wilderness. But Joshua and Caleb are. But it also says their sons will enter. So he's not just given the land to Caleb and Joshua. He's also given it to the sons of those unfaithful people who are going to about to die in the wilderness. So then we go to Numbers 26. 52. And then the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, among these lands shall be divided for an inheritance according to the numbers of names. To the larger group you shall increase their inheritance, and to the smaller group you shall diminish their inheritance, each given their inheritance according to those who were numbered of them. Okay? So, what we have here is the difference here between those in the beginning of, say, the wandering in basically that first couple of years in the Sinai, when they're wandering in the Sinai, versus the end of their wanderings in the Sinai. So it was never intended that Caleb and Joshua would be the only inheritors, but they would be the only people alive there among those 20 or older who would inherit. But the children would also inherit. And then, in verse 26:52, those people who are alive at that point get the inheritance because they're ready for it. So, anyway, I hope that explains it. Thank you very much for the question. It's an interesting question, and I very much appreciate it. Okay, the next question here is from Billy Ningen for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Dr. Falk, where's Pethor in Numbers 22:5? Early daters locate Mount Sinai and Saudi in Saudi Arabia, but would Numbers 20:14 refute that hypothesis? All right, let's go to the passage here. Numbers 22:5. Okay. So he sent messengers to Balaam, son of Beor, at Pithor, which is near the river, in the land of the sons of his people, to call him, saying, Behold, a people came out of Egypt. Behold, they cover the surface of the land, and they are living opposite to me. Okay. The key here is which is near the river. Saudi Arabia is not known for its rivers. So this is in the land of Moab. Essentially, they're talking about the Jordan River. This is the only river of any major importance in the land of southern Canaan. It's the only river. It's the river. So this is a reference to the Jordan. And on the eastern side of the Jordan, you have the land of Moab. So Pithor is in Moab, essentially. And that's pretty much going to be the standard reading of this passage. Okay? So at this point, you were already sort of we already got an inconsistency with this idea that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. But let's look at Numbers 20:14. Now, we probably don't even need this to refute that, but okay, and it says, From Kadesh, Moses sent a message to the king of Edom. Thus your brother said, you know all the hardships that has befallen us. Okay, yes. This would also contradict the idea that that the Israelites went into Saudi Arabia, because they're told that we know where Edom is, and it's in that crook on the southern Sinai. Kadesh would be on, say, the western side of the Sinai, closer to Gaza, whereas you have Edom, and they have to go around Edom and around Moab. You see, if they were in Sinai already, they wouldn't have to go around Edom. They're already past Edom. They could just go straight up. There's no reason for them to bypass Edom if they're already in Sinai. So I think this is an issue for them. This is definitely an issue for the people who think that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. But there's other issues besides this too, such as the location of Pithom, the Sea of Reeds, the length of the journey involved. So and even Exodus 3:1, basically, when it talks about Mount Horeb being west of the wilderness of Midian. So I don't think there's no serious biblical scholar thinks that Mount Sinai is in Saudi Arabia. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Billing in for $2. Thank you very much for the super chat. And he asks, do you think God is at war with the gods? Ooh, interesting question. Well, that's going to depend what you mean by gods and what you mean by war. Okay? Now, let's take the sort of the more Heiserian view on this, where gods just means greater powers. Not the God, not Yahweh, but that Yahweh is a monarchical monotheism, that there's one great God who creates below him lesser powers. Principalities, powers, angels, spirits, demons, and humans. Okay? And within that sort of hierarchy of spiritual beings, some will rebel, some don't. Okay? I think it's more fair to say that some of the gods are at war with God, more than God is at war with the gods. And let me sort of delineate what I mean by that. God is so powerful, he could wipe everyone out in an instant. He could wipe out this whole universe without even with a blink of an eye. There's no real war here. God has already won. God keeps winning. Basically, all the evil powers of evil are doing is sort of deferring the final judgment. And they think they can win that way. So it's more along the lines that the gods, as in these lesser spiritual powers, are at war with the God Supreme. So it's not, as I say, it's not so much that God is at war with the gods. This isn't the sort of the polytheistic struggle that you find in a lot of liberal scholarship. This is more the idea that God has always been supreme, and that you had some of his creations rebelling. So I think that's what's going on here. I think that's probably the best way to look at it. So, and this is totally consistent with the Heiser's view. This is totally consistent with Heiser's view. So, so I think that's probably the best way to look at it. Is that these are spirits in rebellion. These are spirits in Balaam. They're powerful. They're powerful. They're ancient. They're old. They're not used to giving up their power. But they're ultimately no match for the great God that created them too. So anyway, I hope that answered the question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, our next question here is from Aston Weir for $9.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. I once knew an Answers in Genesis fanboy. It's kind of like I know a friend. I have a friend. He refused to consider Genesis A&E context and accused Walton of believing a modern version of Gnosticism. Sad part, he held a THM from Dallas Theological Seminary. Okay, well, that is an interesting contradiction. I will say that. That is an interesting contradiction. Given how much that the THM at Dallas Theological Seminary teaches solid Hebrew and Greek exegesis, as well as the historical context of the Bible, I'm kind of amazed that he got through a THM and still sort of thinks that Walton is a modern version of Gnosticism. Walton is not a Gnostic. Not even close. I mean, anyone who thinks Walton is a Gnostic doesn't understand what he teaches. So, I mean, Walton does thoroughly believe in the Bible. He's a friend of mine. I know he doesn't. I know he's not a Gnostic. I mean, this is just such a ludicrous accusation. It isn't funny. I mean, Gnosticism is a very specific thing. You know, it believes in, say, that the spirit is good and the flesh and the material world's bad. It believes in the salvation by secret knowledge. It holds to a hierarchy of gods. I mean, there's a lot of things that go into Gnosticism that definitely do not apply to Walton. Not even close. Not even close. Anyone who thinks that Walton is a Gnostic has a screw loose. Either he doesn't understand Walton or he doesn't understand Gnosticism. So, I mean, you can disagree with Walton. I tend to more agree with him. I agree with Walton much, much more than I disagree. There's very few things I disagree with Walton. I think the only thing I really have disagreed with him on so far is his recent book on, say, demons. That's probably the only thing I really disagree with him on recently. But most of his stuff on, say, Genesis and the Old Testament, I do agree with him on very much so. But he's not a Gnostic, not in any way, shape, or form. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, and I hope that answered the question. Okay, Charlie Don't Surf 334 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. In Genesis 46:20, Asenath, daughter of Potiphera, is listed as the wife of Joseph. Is this the same Potiphar who owned him? No, it isn't. Okay? They're different. And we have the differentiation here by job title. Okay? Job title tells us what the difference is. Okay? The Potiphar who owned Joseph was captain of the royal guard. He's captain of the guard. He is situated at Avaris. Okay, he's situated at Avaris. He's part of the royal guard that protected the king. So that's his role. That's where he's stationed. Potiphera, father of Asenath, is priest of On. He's the Haritep, the high priest of Heliopolis. Okay? These are very, very different job functions. Okay? Let me put it this way. The high priest at Heliopolis is not doing guard duty at Avaris. Okay? He's got better things to do. Potiphera is a lot higher rank and a lot higher social status than Potiphar. Okay. Now, the two names are essentially the same name in Egyptian. They're in Egyptian, they're the same name. They're Poti Re. The one who's given of Re. Okay? So, the names are the same in Egyptian. But you know what? People had same names, even in the past. Am I the only David that ever existed? I might be the definitive David, but I'm not the only David. So, there's a whole lot here that, we have to kind of understand that these names, all names have popularity over time. This is not the only Potiphar. The Joseph is not the only Joseph in the Bible. You got this Joseph, who was in Egypt, and then you got Joseph, husband of Mary. Names are reused over time, over millennia. This is no different for Egypt than it is for, say, the Bible. So just because the names are the same, we have to be careful here that we don't try to confuse that they're the same person. And the job role here really is what differentiates them. The job role and geography. Genealogists are fond of saying that you can't build a genealogy on names alone. You also have where people lived. So you can differentiate, narrow down which ones are specific to your relation. So in this case, Potiphera, captain of the guard, he lives in Avaris. Potiphera, father of Asenath, he lives at Heliopolis. He's high priest there, higher social rank, different person. So anyway, thank you for my super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay, now we're on to the Twitch ones, finally. Okay. Ooh. We've gotten through the first 25 super chats so far. Wow, we are on a roll. And the next one here is from Ass and Weird for $1.99. Thank you very much for the super chat. Wish I had more money. You're fun to troll. Well. Yeah, well, it's not so fun to get into trouble over your trolls. Just saying. But I really appreciate you supporting this channel with your finances. Even if I am fun to troll, I do still appreciate the super chats. Thank you so much for your contributions and your help for our channel. I very much appreciate that. Okay, next. We've had so many super chats come in over the last hour, by the way. If I miss anything, please let me know. Addison Weir for $1.99. burp?
He said he was running out of questions.
Running out of questions, huh? So you put in that, huh?
I think that was done during the dead time.
That's probably done during the dead time. Okay.
He was entertaining himself.
You're entertaining yourself, huh? Ran out of things to troll me with, so you decided to go with a belch. Nice. This is high-level discourse on this live stream. High intellectual thought here. Well, thank you for the super chat. Okay, next one. Daniel Ray for $4.99, and he says blessings. Well, thank you so much. Blessings to you too. Very much appreciate the super chats. Very much appreciate the support. This has meant so much to us. You can't imagine. It's just been so incredible how people have supported us through this and through super chats. It's just actually crazy how many super chats we've gotten tonight, and we feel so blessed. So thank you very much for the super chat, and thank you for your blessings. Very much appreciated. Okay. Danny Dement for $10. Hey, Dr. Falk, it's not much, but I wanted to help out given the recent trouble. Well, thank you so very much. Your ministry has been such a blessing. Praying unceasingly for you and Mrs. Falk. God bless. Well, God bless you too. We covet the prayers. The prayers have meant so much to us. We have felt the prayers. You know, there was, I'll basically freely admit that there were black moments in all this. You know, moments when we were demoralized. Moments when we felt alone. But the whole community has rallied around us. They've given us support. They've prayed for us. And the one thing that everyone can do that can really help us is just pray. We believe in the power of prayer. And we believe that God works through prayer. So we thank you so much for the prayers. The prayers are really, really important to us. Really important. We appreciate the financial support too, but we can't. The financial support helps us. The prayers are essential for us. We need the prayers. So again, thank you so, so very much for your tireless support and your prayers. God bless you. A very generous super chat here from Random Taffer for $50. Thank you for that very, very generous super chat. And he says, don't have a question, just here to support the good doc. Well, thank you very much for the support. You've been such a blessing to listen to. Love you. God bless. And folded hands. Well, thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you for the blessings. Thank you for the support. We're humbled. We're really, really humbled by everyone who's come by and supported us. We are so grateful, and we are very much appreciated. Thank you so much. AB for $19.99. Thank you very much so much for the super chat. Can you explain Genesis 6:3 and God saying that he will reduce man's years to 120 years? Doesn't it show that ages could be correct for the age of Noah and them? Okay. Let's pull that up because there is a controversy there. We all love a good biblical controversy. Okay. Then the Lord said, my spirit shall not strive with man forever, because he is also flesh. Nevertheless, his days shall be 120 years. Okay. Now, there are two sort of major readings to this. And there's sort of the one reading, and then there's more of a consensus read, more of a popular majority reading. So the minority reading is basically what you suggest here, is that it will reduce the man's years to 120. Now, we have to understand that that reading was not really popular until the 20th century. Okay? What happened in the 20th century was the average age of people changed. There was this prediction. I think his name was the Amazing Criswell. Okay. In the early 20th century, I think around 1901, there was this sort of popular psychic called the Amazing Criswell. And he gave some crazy, basically 7 unbelievable predictions. Okay. One of those, Camel Leopard, the name inspires credibility, sure. But he gave these outlandish predictions, like 7 outlandish predictions. One of those outlandish predictions was that human beings would live on average to the age of 70. Now, today, that doesn't seem very outlandish. Today, people regularly live to 70. They regularly live to 90. Many live to 100. With, say, the extremes of human longevity being up to 120 years in the 20th century, this reading of Genesis 6:3 as being a limit to the years of man being to 120 years became a very, very popular reading. Okay? But this is a reading that's 20th century. This is a 20th century reading. Danny Dement. Wasn't he the intro of Plan 9 from Outer Space? Yes, he was. Same guy. You know your B films. Okay. Now, while that is a very, very popular was a very popular view amongst many evangelicals in the 20th century, it's not the majority view amongst, say, biblical scholars today. Basically, if you look at the text closely, the Lord is saying in verse 3, "My spirit shall not strive with men forever. Because he is also flesh, nevertheless his days shall be 120 years." The idea here is that the Lord is basically saying, I'm starting a clock here. 120 years before the flood. So most scholars today will basically see this not as a limited to the reduction of the age of man, but more that there's a timer set before the flood. Noah, you have 120 years to build that ark. You have 120 years, and then after that, I'm going to destroy all men. So that's more the consensus, the majority view amongst biblical scholars today, and again, this is because, the beginning here is my spirit shall not strive with man forever. Basically, he's not going to let the status quo of the antediluvian people go on forever. He's not going to keep putting up with it. That's essentially what he's saying. He's not going to put up with it. 120 years is all I'm willing to do to extend my grace to these people. And then it's flood time. And that's the majority view of, say, biblical exegetes today. And frankly, I hold that view too. Okay? So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Okay. Traconius Constantinas for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. God bless you, Dr. Falk. You, Mrs. Falk, and Dr. Heiser have been in my prayers. Well, thank you. Thank you for the super chat. Thank you for the prayers. Again, Dr. Heiser and his entire family need prayer. We really, really need to come to prayer to support them at this time. As I said, it's not looking good. So do pray for Dr. Heiser. Do pray for his family. At the same time, too, Kiara and I very, very much appreciate the prayers. We need them. We are fighting a spiritual battle. And we are, on one hand, yes, okay, they're the people who are out to get us, but we know that we are also fighting principalities and powers as well. And at some point, I will share that. I'll share that information as well. So, I know that what's been happening to us this week is not the only battle we're facing. So I very, very much appreciate those prayers. Thank you very much for the super chat. I very much appreciate it. Angel McCann for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thanks for hanging out with us on Sentinel Apologetics for a tribute to Michael Heiser. Hope all is well. It's been a rough week. And she goes on, I know you've had a rough week, bless you. Well, there you go. So you know what's going on. But for me, it was just a thrill to hang out with Rob. I love Rob. I love his channel. I love his content. He's a great friend. And I really respect Michael Heiser. Really respect him. And as I said before, I've criticized some of particular, I should say, fine points of his views, but overall, I think he's right. And that's a huge thing. He's more right than wrong. And one of the things I love about Michael Heiser is his creativity. Whoa, I respect that. I think it's phenomenal. Look, I think we're going to be mining the spiritual riches of Michael Heiser for generations to come. There are very, very few theologians that you can say that about. Yeah, okay, some of the theologians, they'll be on the shelf and you'll refer to them on rare occasions to maybe do a doctoral thesis. But, you're not going to mine them for deep, profound insights. I think Michael Heiser is one of those rare theologians that you're going to be able to mine for deep insights for generations to come. So for me to be on Sentinel Apologetics channel and pay tribute to Michael Heiser, that was an honor. That was an absolute honor. And I'm glad I had the opportunity to do it. I would have kicked myself if I couldn't have been on there. It was just such an honor to do it. To praise a man who's contributed so much to our understanding of the Bible. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Really appreciate it. And bless you too. We got a super chat, but no comment here from Dago Adelaidiano for €10. Thank you very much for the super chat. There's no question here. If you have a question, we'll be happy to answer it. But I want to thank you very much for the super chat and the contribution. Every super chat helps us. You basically put food on our tables. People have asked us if our loss of our position at VSD affects us financially. It doesn't affect us directly financially, but it has implications and impacts. But the fact that you've been supporting us on these live streams has compensated for that. It compensates for that. So we very, very much appreciate it, and we thank you very much for the support. We couldn't do it without these super chats. These super chats make up a large portion of our income. So we really, really appreciate it, and thank you so very much for that. Historical Strategy Gaming for $2. Thank you very much. Super chat. What did Egyptian siege equipment look like? Ooh, interesting question. Interesting question. We actually have some tomb paintings of siege equipment from the tombs of Beni Hassan. They included siege towers and battering rams. And what they would do is they would basically have these towers, and they would roll these towers up to the sides of say walled cities, and there would be a platform on top, and you'd have archers on there, and basically people to go over the sides. Okay, so that was an important piece of siege equipment, is the siege tower. But they also had battering rams. And these battering rams are actually not that much different from medieval battering rams, where you had basically a sheltered hut with a big log that you'd use to batter a gate in, okay, or a wall. So a lot of this equipment didn't change much between, say, Egyptian times and medieval times, but very, very similar in form and function. Very, very similar in form and function. And as I said, the best thing about this is we have drawings of these in the tombs of Beni Hassan. So we know what kind of siege equipment they used. They didn't have, say, catapults or trebuchets. So that had yet to be developed. But as I said, siege towers where they would, say, pull down the wall using the siege tower as well. So they would also use hooks. So they basically get up on there, basically take a big hook and pull down parts of the wall. Yeah, it's pretty impressive. I mean, it's pretty impressive. And frankly, at the time, this was also highly effective too, because a lot of walls, especially in the late Bronze Age, Middle Bronze Age, well, I should say more the late Bronze Age, they started getting into mud brick walls. So mud brick walls are easier to pull down that way than, say, these big Middle Bronze fortifications. Okay, so yeah. Basically, the two things they used were siege towers and battering rams. But that's pretty standard equipment for the ancient world. But that's what they had. So anyway, I hope that answers the question. Great question. Interesting question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Trunks for $5 Australian. Thank you very much for the super chat. What is your opinion on Eastern Orthodoxy? How is a non-Eastern Orthodox Christian supposed to think about the dialogue going on YouTube? Okay. Not really sure of the question here, in all honesty. I'm not aware of what you mean by the non-Eastern Orthodox supposed to think about the dialogue going on YouTube. Now, I'll give you my opinion of what I think of Eastern Orthodoxy. Eastern Orthodoxy is one of the traditional branches of Christianity. Now, I neither endorse nor deprecate any specific denomination. We are a non-denominational channel. We teach from a specifically Christian point of view, but we think all, essentially small o Orthodox branches of Christianity have a voice and something to contribute to the dialogue. Eastern Orthodoxy is among that. It is one of the traditional branches of Christianity. In fact, it's one of the main traditional branches of Christianity. I think it is strongly moored in the traditions of the early Christian church. I think it's got some problems. I think all branches of Christianity have problems. So the question is, are those problems and are those issues going to be important to you? So, I actually have a lot of Eastern Orthodox friends. I don't have anything against Eastern Orthodoxy. If that's your tradition, go for it. I have no problems with this. But all churches have their particular problems. And you can't name me a branch of Christianity that doesn't have a theological issue of some kind. So, with that said, I think it's perfectly acceptable. If you want to be a Christian, if you want to be Eastern Orthodox, go for it. I have no problems with it, at least at its core fundamentals. Okay, but I will say this about Eastern Orthodoxy. And this is not a problem with Eastern Orthodoxy. I have a bit of a problem with new Eastern Orthodox converts. Okay. These are sometimes called ortho bros. And if you know about Eastern Orthodoxy, you know what I mean by ortho bros. Essentially, new converts to Eastern Orthodoxy who may have been in Eastern Orthodoxy for 6 months, a year, and they think they know everything about Eastern Orthodoxy. And then they say, this is the Orthodox tradition and everyone's a heretic. Yeah, it doesn't work that way. So does not work that way. They're a pain. It can take, I'll say this about as far as the branches of Christianity are concerned. You know, there's some branches of Christianity, you can learn their fundamentals pretty quickly. You know, you can learn how to be a Southern Baptist pretty fast. Okay? There's not much complexity to it. The fundamentals of Eastern Orthodoxy can take you 20 years to learn. Okay? 20 years. And the reason why it's so much more difficult to sort of grasp in some ways is, unlike, say Southern Baptist convention, where they've codified all the essential doctrines into a nice distilled package for you, Eastern Orthodoxy is a huge diversity of opinion. And it's based upon the consensus of the Church Fathers. That's the rub. The Church Fathers are an incredibly diverse body of writings. Now, most of us get into reading the Church Fathers like reading Philip Schaff's works. Okay? Philip Schaff's works are, say, 10 volumes. I think it's 10 volumes. Maybe it's 12. I don't remember. You know, at least for his ante-Nicene Fathers. And then you got another 12 volumes for the post-Nicene Fathers of the West. And then the volume 2, which is another 24 volumes. And you think, okay, you know, I've got, you know, roughly 40-ish volumes here. You know, I can read that, no problem. And then you discover all of these are translated from a series called Migne. Migne was an editor in the 17th, 18th century who collected the Church Fathers from various monasteries and published them. And then you discover that his series is 300 volumes of the writings of the Church Fathers in Greek and Latin. Who can read all of that and condense a consensus? This is sort of why patristic scholars spend a lifetime of learning. That's the consensus tradition of Eastern Orthodoxy. This is why it takes so long to digest Eastern Orthodoxy. Okay? Very, very difficult to do. You have to be a lot more circumspect about Eastern Orthodoxy. Yeah, BC. How many volumes? Yeah, 300. 300. And they're not small volumes. They're not these little tiny books. I mean, they're big folios about that thick. We saw Trinity had a set of Migne. You know, it went for a whole what's it called now?
An entire book.
Yeah, a row.
Yeah.
It was a library aisle of volumes. Yeah, that's a 3 with 2 zeros. Yeah. Yeah. Crazy how much. I mean, the early church fathers were voluminous writers. They're absolutely. We had a question last week about Irenaeus being prolix, being wordy, excessively wordy. Well, he was not alone. Yeah, Patris Petui Sumatos says Patrologia Latina is another 221. Yeah. No human being can really read it all and condense it. It's just crazy how much writing there is. That's the consensus tradition of Eastern Orthodoxy. This is why it takes so long to digest. And any ortho bro who thinks he can digest this in 6 months to a year doesn't know what he's talking about. Okay, so while I do have, can I get these on Audible? No, you can't. BC, nice try, BC. That was funny though. Yeah, so I think while Eastern Orthodoxy as a branch of Christianity is totally acceptable, you have to have humility when you go into it, just because the consensus of Orthodox tradition is so vast and so diverse. So you are dealing with a huge amount of material, and very, very few people will actually take the time to really study it in that sort of depth. So, getting to your second question, how is a non-Eastern Orthodox Christian supposed to think about the dialogue going on YouTube? I'm not aware of what that dialogue is, so I'll have to defer on that question. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. I like Eastern Orthodoxy as a denomination, but it does have its challenges. You might be up to those challenges if that's what you're thinking, if you're in that already, or if you're considering going into it. But it does have its challenges. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Patrick Smith for $50. Thank you very much for the super chat. 3 hours, probably not. Smile. What do you think of Jim Tabor? Well, we're already at 2 hours and 30 minutes, so yeah, we're probably going to be going a little beyond 3 hours here. We might have to cut it off at 4 just because, but I still have to go to work tomorrow, but yeah. We're not going to make 3 hours. Not a chance. I don't know anything about Jim Tabor off the top of my head, so I'm going to have to decline that question, but I want to thank you. I'd have to look into who Jim Tabor was. I'm not really sure of who he is. So anyway, I can't comment on anyone. I just don't know. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. It's a very, very generous super chat, and I thank you so much for the support of this channel. We can't do it without people like you. So thank you so much. Historical strategy gaming. Dr. Falk will put to be continued on the video. No, we're not going to do that. Because the problem is if we start doing a to be continued video, it'll just rack up more and more and more and more. We'll never get through it.
We will be delighted to have further party next Friday.
Yeah, we will be delighted to have another live stream next Friday. All right. Dago Adela. I'm going to butcher this. I'm so sorry. Adelidiano. Sorry about that. I did my best. I'm terrible with names. Terrible. Sorry. For €5. Thank you so much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Can't think of a question and my phone's about to die. Thanks for these live streams. Peace. Well, you're most welcome. We do these live streams as a service to the community. Yes, we do earn a sizable portion of our income from these, but that was never the intent of these live streams. This intent of the live streams was to serve the community and answer questions. We just never expected people to support us through it. And we are grateful for it because we did need it. We didn't know we needed it. but we also very much appreciate it. And we're humbled by people like you who just support us just for the sake of supporting us. So thank you very much. And thank you for your support. Very much appreciated. Wow, a very generous super chat from SlamRN. It's good to see you here tonight, Susan. Thank you very much for that super chat. It's a very, very generous $100 super chat. Amazing. Amazing. Thank you so much for that generosity. And she says, have a great weekend. Someday I'll be able to think of a good question. Hey, anytime you want to ask a question, we'll field it. Okay? We love having you here. It's good to see you here tonight. We so very, very much appreciate it. And we appreciate that generosity. That is so helpful to our channel. We so much appreciate it. So when you do have a good channel, good question, or even not so good question, we'll take those too. You know, look, I'll say this. The only stupid question I've ever come across is when students tell me, is that going to be on the exam? Every other question's a valid question. And the only reason that other question was a stupid question was I told them anything would be on the exam. So, but yeah, absolutely. Whenever you have a question, come on, we'll answer it. Be happy to do so. And I want to thank you very much for that really, really generous super chat. It really helps us. We so appreciate it. So thank you very much. And we will try to have a great weekend. So blessings to you. Paulus Patros for $10 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. What do you think of the claim that the context of the laws in Exodus 21 to 23 assumes Israel is settled in Canaan, and so the laws don't date to the Mosaic period? Does Exodus 20:25 assume property and farming? Okay. Now, here's the thing. Exodus 21 to 23 does assume Israel will be settled in Canaan. Does that mean the laws don't date to the Mosaic period? Not necessarily. And here's the reason why. We have to remember that the Israelites are coming out of the land of Egypt. What did they do in Egypt? The Bible tells us that they not only made bricks, but they were agricultural farmers. They did agricultural work. They would have been aware while living in Egypt that people were allotted plots of land. Each family was allotted a certain amount of land, and at least of the farming class, and they were given the responsibility to till that land and were taxed on that land. And they couldn't go beyond that land. So after the inundation in Egypt, the administrators would basically stake out a plot of land for each person or each farming family. And they were not allowed to move that stake. That stake was part of it. So a lot of the laws that we find in Exodus 21 to 23 would have already been germane to agricultural life in Egypt. So already, everyone coming out of Egypt is assuming that they're going to get they are going to a land and getting an inheritance of a land flowing with milk and honey. Now, goat's milk and wild honey, but milk and honey nonetheless. And they're going to be sojourning there, which means there's going to be limits to what their territory can be. So, in many respects, many of these laws are already given an extrapolation of what they did in Egypt. I mean, plainly what they did in Egypt. You know, in Egypt, they're already doing, say, sheep herding. Well, you know, they're going to be doing that in Israel. In Egypt, some of them are going to have a plot of land. That's going to be an issue in Israel. People are going to want to move the boundary marker. Well, that's definitely going to be a problem in Israel. So just because it's assumed that they're going to be settled in Egypt doesn't actually mean that this is post-Mosaic. And that's, again, because that these were agricultural workers when they lived in Egypt. They know they're going to the Promised Land. They're anticipating having an agrarian lifestyle back in Israel. So they're going to need laws for that. And it's better that they establish those laws before they enter the land than afterwards. So, yeah, they were farmers in Egypt. Again, the text is very, very clear that they did both making bricks and agricultural work. They would have been very, very familiar with agricultural systems. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Zeobeo for €11. Thank you very much for the super chat. Pick one of the questions from at Bonbon. Laugh out loud.
Bonbon, the question.
Okay.
Did Egyptians ever have to reconcile scientific understanding of their day with their religious beliefs, especially within contact with the...
Let me just see if I can find that.
My computer's only doing...
All right, I am looking for one of Bonbon's questions. Let me see if I can find one here. He's actually got a lot of questions here. Where was he? Where did he specify that?
A little farther down after
Okay, a little after that, huh?
Yeah.
Okay, let me see if I can find that.
First says he'll write the one he wants here, 2 or 3 people, and then he's the one I just read. You want me to cut and paste it at the bottom, and you can just grab it? Let me do that.
Okay. Oh, I see it. I found it. Found it. Okay. Did the Egyptians ever had to reconcile scientific understanding of their day with their religious beliefs, especially with increasing contact with Greeks and other societies? Not really. And part of this is that there wasn't really the idea of scientific understanding. Okay? So, they did change their religious beliefs with, say, with the contact with the Greeks. It became more allegoricalized, more basically symbolic in a lot of respects. The contact with the Greeks, especially Greek philosophy, did change the nature of Egyptian religion belief, but it was sort of a kind of a feedback loop in the respect that, say, the Greeks got philosophy from the ancient Egyptian religion, turned it into a full sort of secularized philosophy, and then that philosophy came back and then changed Egyptian religion. But the whole idea of scientific understanding, it wasn't really... I mean, you had Greek knowledge. You had Greek knowledge, you had Greek... a kind of a primitive science. You know, like for example, their understanding about the shape of the Earth being a globe. And actually, interestingly enough, that whole idea of the Greeks understanding the Earth as a globe actually can be seen in one of the Egyptian temples, where you see a globe being supported by the Egyptian gods. So that's really interesting right there. So there was this sort of interaction that was going on between cultures. Okay. But the science, as I said, Egypt didn't have a strong science to begin with. They had a strong religion, really strong religion, but it was also a religion that was very adaptable. And likewise, Greek philosophy could take aspects of that religion and incorporate that into their philosophy as well. So both sides of, say, these societies were basically exchanging ideas. Christopher Partridge really talks about this well when he talks about the development of new religious movements, which is that all religions are putting ideas into a pool of ideas and then sort of taking out ideas and putting some back in. So there's no sort of religion in a vacuum. There's no religion in a vacuum. All religion is going to consult other religions, other ideas, even scientific ideas. And it's going to adapt or change or explain their doctrine in light of those ideas. Sometimes they'll reject those ideas. Sometimes they'll embrace them. Sometimes they will, have intertextual dialogue with them. So it's not a one thing or the other, and they aren't going to. Sometimes they'll reconcile. Sometimes they're going to adapt. Sometimes they're going to, have sort of a pushback in the other way too. So they did had to meet. The blending of cultures did result in an intermixture of religious beliefs with, say, Greek philosophy. So anyway, I hope that helped, and I hope that answered your question. Thank you for that sponsored question by, see if I get that right, by Zeobeo. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciate it. Kenny Reagan for $25. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thank you for the work you do. It has been very helpful to me. Smiley face. I didn't have enough space for my question, but if you're willing, I posted it in the chat. All right, I'll look for it. Let's look for it. Okay, so there should be a question by Kenny Reagan. Okay. And he goes, what do you think about the view of some progressive Christians, not my own, that God could not, in principle, have commanded the kind of genocide we see in the Old Testament against all the men? And he continues, women and children of Jericho or the Amalekites, and that these passages either A, are hyperbole, reflecting literary custom, meant to show God's complete victory, but didn't historically. Is there more to this? Occur, or as written, or B, reflect mistaken beliefs the Israelites had about God, and thus did indicate that the Bible, while inspired, is not inerrant. Okay. You're talking here about the whole concept of harem. Harem is the idea of being dedicated for the ban, or exclusion, or devotion to sacrifice. It actually has a variety of meanings. And when a city like Jericho or Hatzor or Ai is put under the ban, it is assumed that it is destroyed with all the women, children, and possessions. Okay? Now, the whole idea of genocide is in some ways a misnomer. It's a faulty affectation here. It's a faulty definition, or a faulty term when being applied to what's happening in the Old Testament. Part of it is that harem doesn't only mean to, say, destroy utterly. although it can mean that in certain circumstances. It can mean to dedicate. It can mean to drive out. Essentially, when the Israelites come into the Promised Land, they're making the basically saying that we're coming in, get out while the getting's good. If you stay, well, that's your problem. Some cities will try to do a treaty. We see this with the Gibeonites. They strike a treaty. Other cities will basically, fight. Fight, on all means. Some will fight when they even don't have to, which is really strange, But one of the things we kind of understand here, too, is that it's not genocide. They're not wiping everyone out. Because there are many Canaanites in the land after the conquest. In fact, the Israelites are told not to intermarry with them. Well, you can't intermarry with someone who's dead. So it's not genocide in the proper sense of the term. The Canaanites are a threatened people. Okay, they are a people already in decline when the Israelites come in, and it's not just the Israelites that they're having a problem with. They're also in decline in their competition against the Philistines too. So the Canaanites are kind of sandwiched in between the two. So they've got declining population numbers, and then they're finding themselves embattled on both sides. You can't fight a two-front war. It's super difficult to fight a two-front war, and the Canaanites don't do this successfully. So, on the one hand, I don't think it's a mistaken belief about their God. On the other hand, there is a sense of hyperbole. Definitely a sense of hyperbole. There's also the fact that it's limited to certain cities. It's limited to the cities. I mean, it's first of all limited only to the cities. Okay, only to the cities, and only certain cities undergo the harem. Like, for example, when they the first time they conquer Jerusalem, they leave that city mostly intact and basically kill very few people. They just sort of knock down the walls, go in there, and then leave. And the Jebusites are still there to rebuild. This provides a problem for, say, Judah later on when they have to retake that land. By the time they retake it, their first attempt to knock down the city is rebuilt, and rebuilt stronger. There's a comment in this chat here. Debater of everything, presenter of at nothing. At what point does it become genocide? Genocide is really when you try to wipe out an entire nation. And basically an entire, say, a genes. Family type, exactly. So, I mean, if you're trying to wipe out a whole people group, that's genocide. There doesn't seem to be any indication in the Old Testament that this was genocide in the proper sense of the term. It is limited. There are huge limitations to this that do not include the entire people group. Some of these people, honestly, are going to be integrated into Israelite society. They're going to intermarry with the Israelites, even though they're told not to. They're going to intermarry with the Israelites, and they're going to become Israelites as a result of it. So, we have to sort of take a balanced perspective of the text in terms of what's hyperbole, what's the limitations of the texts, and what is basically the purpose of this, which is to drive out the people and take over the land. Basically, they're not even destroying every city here. I mean, they're driving out the people and basically taking over the houses, essentially. And there are those exceptions like Heiser and Jericho, which are basically big. Well, I wasn't big, but Jericho and Heiser were big, tough nuts to crack. and this is sort of why the conquest goes into two phases. Okay, you got one phase where it's, establishing a foothold. They're destroying Jericho. They're destroying the cities at the Heshbon and Arnon, so they can have an easy entry into the Promised Land. And then they tackle the next big major city there, that's Hatzor. After that, every other city will be easy. So there's a reason why they do that. Okay, because without taking out those cities, it's going to be very, very difficult for them to break up into tribes, and then each tribe to establish its inheritance. So I basically have come to the conclusion here that in many ways using the term genocide is an overstatement. I think it overextends the reading of Haram or Harem. It's not an accurate term. It's also, again, there's limits to it. There's limits to it. So anyway, I hope that answered the super chat. Thank you very much for the question. Very much appreciated. Farmhouse Theologian for 25 Australian. Thank you so much for the super chat. He has two emojis here, a red heart and a folded hands of prayer. Thank you very much for the super chat. We do really appreciate the support and the prayers. We very, very much appreciate the prayers. Keep praying for us. We need this. So thank you very much, and God bless you. A very, very generous super chat again from Jack Ray. Good to see you here, friend. We so appreciate your support. Thank you very much for joining us tonight. I'm just glad to see you here. You've been a great friend to our ministry. We so appreciate it, and we so appreciate your support. You say thank you, but it's us who has to thank you. You've helped us so much. You have supported us tirelessly. We so appreciate it. Thank you so very much. Mouthwash for $5. Good to see you here tonight. Dr. Falk voice? Okay. Thank you very much for the answers. Very much appreciated. Over 100 people here tonight. That many?
There were.
Wow. Wow. That's our biggest turnout ever. I didn't even realize it. Whoa. Seems controversy has a silver lining. Oh. Yes, but that silver lining comes at a cost. This was a high cost. There was a silver lining, yes. We did get more subscribers than usual, and tonight's turnout has been fabulous. Absolutely fabulous. I don't know if I would have wanted to pay that price normally, but yeah, that's correct. Man intends it for evil, but God intends it for good. So God will use this for his purposes and for his greater glory. And I can rest in that. Definitely. God will use this, and God will bring his glory from it. So thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And you are most welcome for the answers. Again, this is our way of giving back to the community. Michael Laterno for $15 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. I've read that several Church fathers, i.e. Origen, John Chrysostom, and Jerome, believed it wasn't important. But what is your take on Bible inerrancy? Now, I'm a biblical inerrantist. So what I mean by that is that the Bible in the autographs was inerrant as far as its faith and teaching is concerned. Okay? So, Did a super chat get missed? Okay.
I just asked him to.
Let's see. I'm going to scroll back here. Hopefully it did too far back. Yeah, it's already dropped off. Yeah, haven't put it in the chat. I will cut it. We will take it. Okay. Yeah, if anyone is missing a super chat, let us know and we'll take it because we do. Sometimes things are drop off and we don't have any control over that. So we don't want to miss a single super chat. We'll thank you for it. Include the amount too, so we can thank you for that as well. Okay. I believe in biblical inerrancy. I don't think there's any compulsion. I mean, there's nothing in the Bible that says you have to believe in biblical inerrancy. I just believe it because it seems intuitive. So it's not so much that the Bible is saying you must believe in inerrancy, but I think also when I look at the Bible, I have a hard time finding error with it once I do say it's the lower text critical work. I mean, there's nothing in the Bible that seems beyond explanation. So, so whether or not you think that's important, okay, that's fine. If you don't believe the Bible is inerrant, but I believe it. Does that change much? Not really. One way or the other. But again, I also believe in the Chicago Statement of Inerrancy, that the Bible is consistent with what we know of history, that what it affirms and what it teaches is true insofar as the autographs are concerned. So again, there's going to be a certain limitations to all that and constraints, but so with that said, I think it's an important doctrine. It's really not even a doctrine, it's a dogma. But I think it's important. I agree with it. But I know Christians who don't and are still Christians. So anyway, that's my opinion on this. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Did we get Mouthwash's question? All right. All right. Yeah, I see it. Let me go down and grab it. Okay, got it. Okay. Okay, Dr. Falk, has been a long time ago mentioned people having psychological harm from witnessing or experiencing God. Does he have any stories or knowledge on the matter? What about Eastern Orthodox? Oops. Who claim to experience the uncreated light, which they call Tabor light, the energies of God. That is not a phenomenon I've really studied closely. Okay.
It was.
Oh, are you talking about the trauma of holiness? Okay. All right, let's go back to the original question here. Okay. This is rare. Really, really rare. There isn't a lot of stories on this. You do get some things like the Book of Exodus, where God talks to the people on from the mountain, and they say, use prophets because if we keep hearing the voice of God, we'll surely die. Okay. You see angels basically say, and the first, people are terrified, and the first words out of their mouth is "Fear not." Okay. So it's not a common phenomenon. The trauma of holiness will mess up your head, and you may not get psychological harm, but you'll get stuff like, well, you'll question it constantly. Do you really see it? Okay, So that's there is that when you do see or witness or experience God. Yeah, I misunderstood the question. I thought you meant like witnessing to people, or as opposed to experiencing God Himself. In an unadulterated sense. So, but yeah, that's the trauma of holiness. Um, yeah, it's going to leave you messed up. But it's going to leave you messed up in a variety of ways. Most commonly, it's going to start your mind's going to reject it, and it's probably the biggest way it's going to mess you up. Which is that here's the strange thing about, say, witnessing the supernatural. You'll witness a shadow man or hear a ghostly voice, and you won't question that. In fact, the one time I saw a shadow man, I'm darn sure I saw it. I mean, I am absolutely dead sure I saw what I saw. People don't have that experience when they experience God. People in general, when they experience God, always seem to question whether or not they experienced God. It's like the sin nature of mankind can't accept in their brains the holiness that they just witnessed. They can't accept it. There's you're in many ways we're disintegrated beings. We're beings that are our soul and natures are at war. Our flesh is at war with our soul. We're trying to get through this world, as fallen beings. And then we encounter pure holiness. The mind cannot keep the idea of holiness as being something that's part of your reality. So when we deal with something like the sort of the trauma of holiness, that's what you're going to come down to. You're going to reject it outright. Basically say, well, no, I didn't see that. That's not true. That was a bad burrito that day. Or you're going to say, well, I saw it, but is there another explanation? Do I really believe what I saw? And that's really common. That's really, really common. It can be traumatic. It can be intense. It can be beatific. But each one of those kinds of experiences is going to present a problem. It's each one of those experiences, whether traumatic, intense, beatific. Some people have experienced the divine in a beautiful, glorious way. And then the very next week say, well, did I really experience that? So that sort of tells you kind of what we're dealing with psychologically. And frankly, some people I know people who have claimed to have seen angels and then denied the presence of God altogether. And you kind of ask them, well, you've seen angels. You've seen like the full presence of a divine, powerful angel. How do you deny God in all this? And it always sort of boils down to, well, I'm not sure I really saw what I think I saw. Well, you claimed it at the time. Yeah, but I question it now. That tells me a lot. That tells me an awful lot. So, that's sort of my thoughts on that. I can't speak to the say the Tabor experience of some Eastern Orthodox. Again, I haven't studied that in depth, but I've had enough people come up to me with those sorts of encounters and what they've experienced to let me know that, and I've heard theologians say this too. So it's not just them. This is also a theological concept that the trauma of holiness, that holiness creates trauma in sinful man. So there's a theological precept of this as well. So anyway, I hope that answers your question. Sorry about the skipped super chat. It wasn't intentional. This is the software acting up again. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Alrighty, let's get back here. Okay, our next one. And again, if anyone if we skipped any super chat, please let Kiara know, because she'll direct me to. We'll make sure everyone's super chats are at least acknowledged. Where do we leave off here? Okay. I think it looks like oh, we didn't miss his super chat, by the way, hun. He just hadn't come up yet. Okay.
His question, so we're probably still queuing.
Yeah, we're probably still queuing. We're probably way behind here. Okay. Yeah, that was that was your question.
There's a lot of super chats.
We just hadn't gotten to it yet. There's a lot. Look, there's a lot of super chats tonight, so I can understand if you thought we missed it. We just hadn't gotten there yet.
But blessings to you all.
But blessings to you also. Yeah, we're way behind on super chats tonight. Just so many. Okay, the next one that came before mouthwash here was Samuel Hardoin for $5. Thank you very much, super chat. Who on earth were the Sethites in Numbers 24:17? Well, let's look at that up. So, Numbers. Uh, 24. 17. See if we can go back a little. Okay. I'll start at verse 16. The oracle of him who hears the words of God and knows the knowledge of the Most High, who sees the vision of the Almighty falling down, yet having his eyes uncovered. I see, but now, not now. I behold him, but not near. A star shall come forth from Jacob, a scepter shall arise from Israel, and shall crush the forehead of Moab and tear down the sons of Sheth. That's what you mean by the Shethites here. And Edom shall be a possession, and Seir, its enemy, also shall be a possession, while Israel performs valiantly. Okay. Now, we're not really sure who the Sethites are in Numbers 24:17. My guess, and this is just a speculation, so don't shoot me if people disagree with my speculation here. But my speculation is it's a reference to the Ammonites. Or sorry, not Ammonites, Amorites. Amorites. Okay. Basically those descendants of the northern Mesopotamians. So that's just a guess. And again, that's probably the best guess. We're not really sure what we mean, what we know about the sons of Sheth. There could be another reference here that I'm not familiar with off the top of my head. I have not looked at this in detail, but that would be just a guess, is that we're talking here about the Amorites. Basically, those people from northern Mesopotamia who basically traveled from northern Mesopotamia and occupied the basically northern Israel. So that's probably the best I can do here without looking it up. And I mean, technically, this is a reference to, say, the sons of Seth, but Seth is the son of Adam. So there does seem to be some indication that these are people who just sort of are generic descendants of Noah. So that's probably the best I can do here, given that I haven't looked into this. And again, this is a wild guess. So it could be wrong. Could be wrong. And if someone corrects me on here, I'd be more than happy to admit I'm wrong. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it, but that's what I can gather from this. Okay, the next one here. And by the way, we're about 40% down the list. So I might have to take a break. Okay. Yeah, it might be a B2. Who knows? All right. Okay, I'll take this. This next one here is from Angel VWM or WVM for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. Hi, Dr. Falk. Because ancient pagans believed that they trapped a god in an idol. Yep. What were their thoughts on multiple people having an idol of the same god? Ooh, that's an interesting question. Well, there's been they never really reconciled this. This is not something, we're not talking about a society here that have had a cohesive theology that reconciled this completely. Now, some people in the ancient world thought that the god basically could, say, context switch. They could jump from idol to idol. Okay? Some thought that like, for example, Amun-Re at Karnak, Amun-Re at Medina Habu. Different instances of God, of the god Amun-Re. That god at Karnak, not the same, exact same as the one at Medina Habu. Yes, they're the same god, but their presences are different. Okay, so what we're dealing with is the inconsistency of polytheism. And polytheism, this is one of the inconsistencies of it, and people in the ancient world just accepted this. To give you an example of this, we do still see this in this thinking in some respects. Now, James Hoffmeyer, when he was in Egypt, he had this little kid come up to him and try to sell him the hand of Luke. Okay? The left hand of Luke. Now, the left hand of Luke is a holy relic in one of the Orthodox churches. And, he goes, well, of course, kind of creepy that a little kid comes up to you with a dead guy's hand, but okay. Going with it. He goes, well, the hand of Luke is already relic in this church. And the kid goes, oh, this is the hand of Luke when he was a child. But that's the thinking. That's the thinking. They don't see any inconsistency there. So in the ancient world, two idols holding the presence of the god was not an inconsistency that that bothered him. So, we have to keep that in mind, that the fact that multiple people having an idol for the same god, you know, that was just part of the background of polytheism. It was strictly localist. There was the idea that a god can be only in one place at one time. But you could trap at that god and he's yours. I don't know which god my next door neighbor has, but in his idol, but I've got the real one. That's all I counted to them. So anyway, I hope that helps you to understand what they believe. Yeah, this is not a consistency thing. It didn't matter to them. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay. GNP17 for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Is Joshua 5:14-15 a theophany or a Christophany? Well, let's look at it and find out. Joshua 5:14. Back a verse for context. Go by start verse 13. Now it came about when Joshua was by Jericho that he lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, a man was standing opposite to him with his sword drawn in his hand. And Joseph went to him and said, "Are you for us or for our adversaries?" And he said, "No, rather I indeed came now as captain of the host of the Lord." And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and bowed down and said, "What has my Lord said to his servant?" And the captain of the Lord of hosts said to Joshua, "Remove your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy." And Joshua did so. Okay. In my opinion, this is a Christophany. This is a Christophany. This is not a theophany. And the difference here is that theophany is, say, when you get the manifestation of, say, the Father in a human-like form. Whereas a Christophany is the second person of the Trinity, Christ, being in a pre-incarnate human form. So it's a similar manifestation, it's just a different person of the Trinity. Okay? Now, what makes this a Christophany? Very, very interesting. It's two things. First of all, we know this is a Christophany as opposed to a angelic revelation, because in verse 15 it says, "Remove your sandals, for the place you are standing is holy." So essentially, Joshua is now standing in a place that's been made sacred by the presence of God. The other thing is the captain of the host of the Lord, Yahweh Sabaoth. Okay, this is identified in the book of Isaiah. Okay, thus says Yahweh, King of Israel, and his Redeemer, the Yahweh of hosts. I am the first, I am the last, besides me there is no God. That Yahweh of hosts is the Yahweh Sabaoth. It's the same sort of diction that we have right here. So, this is unmistakably a Christophany. Okay? So, that would be based upon the exegesis, what I would surmise from this. So, anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. What I'm actually going to do here is I'm going to take a short break to grab more coffee, because my coffee is empty. My coffee cup is full of disappointment. It's just full of empty. This is a sad thing. I can't cope with that sadness. So I need more coffee. So I'm just going to take a really, really short break, and I will be right back.
coffee.
That's the juice is that blue. Okay, we're back. I got my coffee. Kiara got her coffee. The bunny got a bunny cookie. Everyone's happy. No more disappointment. Okay, so next super chat. Our next super chat is from Destiny Knight for 1999. Thank you very much for the super chat. Shalom, Dr. Folk. Well, shalom to you too. Yeah, BC bunny cookie. Yeah, our bunnies get kinds of cookies. Can you talk about the context of 1 Timothy 2, 11 to 15? How should we best understand the passage? All right, let's get that up. I think, by the way, I think we're going to have to cut this off at midnight, by the way. So we'll take as many of these super chats as we can by midnight, and then I think I am going to have to cut this off just because we'll have gone on for 4 hours, and there's just no practical way for us to do as all the questions. We'll do a quick thank you for everyone at if we hit the 10 to midnight mark, we'll do a quick thank you for everyone, and but not answer the questions because we're just kind of pressed for time at this point. So that's just going to be a practical matter, and we just can't help it, just because we had so many people. All right. So, 1 Timothy. 1 Timothy 2. And this is one of the pastoral epistles where Paul writes to Timothy. Okay. Uh, go a little bit up. Verse 9. Likewise, I want women to adorn themselves with proper clothing, modestly and discreetly, not with braided hair or gold or pearls or costly garments, but rather by means of good works, as befits women making a claim to godliness. Essentially, in the earlier part of this passage, he's basically saying that, and frankly, to be honest, this is something that should apply to men too. Okay, that our godliness is basically demonstrated by our good works. It's basically by our good works, not by our external appearance. And I think that's really important here. That this is sort of the focus of this chapter is that our good works and our piety are our claims to holiness. Not by how we look on the outside. Beautiful clothings, expensive jewelry. In the case of men, expensive watches. Okay, so I think this goes both ways on this one. Verse 11. Let a woman quietly receive instruction with entire submissiveness, but I do not allow a woman to teach or exercise authority over a man and to remain quiet. For it was Adam who was first created, then Eve. And it was not Adam who was deceived, but the woman, being quite deceived, fell into transgression. But women shall be preserved through the bearing of children if they continue in faith and sanctity with self-restraint. Okay. I take a slightly different view on this than some exegetes. Now, there's the whole, say, complementarian, egalitarian debate that goes on with this passage. Egalitarians will basically say this is something that's culturally specific for Timothy's church, and that men and women have equal standing in all things and can teach in all ways. Complementarians will look at this and go, well, this is an appeal to creation. Therefore, that because Adam was created first and Eve came from Adam, there's a hierarchy here that needs to be recognized. I'm more focused on, say, verse 15, which is that preservation passage. Here's what I think. I think that if women were allowed to teach, exercise authority over men, that men would check out. They'd totally check out. There'd essentially be no place for men. And you could sometimes say, and this is not about ability. No one is basically saying this is about ability. Women are entirely capable of teaching, preaching, in all capacities. I have no problem with women teaching at seminaries. No problem with it at all. I have no problem with women holding high ranks in the church. But I do think there comes a point where, say, the men have to take charge. Because otherwise they're sitting around doing nothing and letting the women do all the work. Don't women have enough work to do? Really? So, I think that this is yeah. Yeah, this is to be very blunt about this. This is about God forcing men to get off their butts and do something. Essentially, okay. This is not. I mean, this passage has been greatly abused, greatly abused. And has been used to keep women down. But it's not about that. It's about men getting off their butts and doing something. So basically taking the reins and, being an active part in the local church. So, yeah, because the fact is, the women are going to contribute greatly, regardless. They're going to basically contribute, be in every capacity in the church. They're going to contribute by the bearing of children, and they're going to continue in faith. They're going to continue in love. They're going to be the backbone of the church. And frankly, they've always been the backbone of the church. The earliest, I mean, one of the big sort of criticisms by the Romans of the church was that the Christian church was a religion of slaves and women. So this is a call for men to stand up and take, basically do something. So anyway, I'm going to leave it at that. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. Really weird question here from the Camilla Part for $5. Shabbat Shalom. Shabbat Shalom to you too. So, who was that naked boy in Gethsemane, and why was he naked? What naked boy? I have no idea what you're talking about here. You're gonna need a passage. You're gonna need a text here. Yeah, basically, you're gonna need to put in a Bible verse because I have no idea what you're talking about here. So, anyway, I don't understand the question. So, with that said, you'd need to give me chapter and verse. So, yeah, I can hear it's in Mark, but again, I need chapter and verse. So, okay. So, unless I get chapter and verse, I can't answer this one. So, I don't know the reference. Thank you very much for the super chat, but again, I don't think I can answer this one. Yeah, if you give me the chapter and verse, I'll do my best, but I'm not really familiar with this one. All right. Andrew Cahill for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter, Star Wars or Star Trek, Acer or RC. Okay. Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter. Oh. That's a tough one. I'm going to go with Lord of the Rings on this one. Star Wars or Star Trek? Babylon 5. RC or Azor? ETS. Thank you very much for the super chat. I hope that answered your questions. The Camilla part for $2. Is it true that true foxes use sound to build the pyramids? Somebody's been reading too much on my Discord server. Could be. Yeah. The whole idea that pyramid stones could be levitated with sound, no basis in fact. Just because you can move a pebble with sound does not mean you can move a huge block with sound. So, yeah, I don't think so. But regardless, foxes are really, really cool animals, but I don't think they had that kind of aptitude. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Oh. All right, okay, I will see this here. Okay, there it is. All right, we got the verse. So let's go to the Bible here. Let's take a look. Mark 14. Okay. This is the Passover, the unleavened bread. Way down in the chapter. Okay, we are at the betrayal here. But a certain one of those who stood by. So this is at Gethsemane, where Jesus is betrayed, and the soldiers come to take him captive. Okay. And struck the slave a year, and Jesus answered them to say, "Have you come out swords and clubs to arrest me as a robber? Every day I was with you in the temple, and you did not seize me. But this happened that the scriptures may be fulfilled." And they left him and fled, and a certain young boy was following him, wearing nothing but a linen sheet over his naked body. And they seized him. But he left the linen sheet behind and escaped naked. That's a good question. Doesn't necessarily mean naked, but it does mean poorly clothed. But it does mean naked because he left the sheet behind. So, not sure we know who that was. This is something I have to probably look up, honestly.
I don't think there's any other reference.
No, there isn't.
It might be one of those recordings that people at the time would know who it is.
Yeah.
We were there and we're left scratching.
Yeah. It's not clear here from the text who it is. So this is something I'm going to have to look up and get back to you on. Okay? And sometimes that happens.
Tui said Robert Rowe has
Well, this is so vague that it could be a lot of different things. But I just don't happen to know the scope of the interpretation for this verse. Okay? So, again, moving on for time. You'll have to wait till next week on this one. So, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Can't answer you this right now. We'll have to get back to you. Okay. Next one. Ooh, are we getting to the end here? No way. We got to the end of the super chats. We did. Yeah, that I missed them all.
Oh, you missed. There's a lot more.
Oh, there is a lot more. Oh, wow.
Your machine is just refusing to acknowledge it. Your computer knows how much time you spent. No, it's.
All right, I'm gonna have to restart this, and hopefully we'll get some. It's missed a lot. Yeah, I can see it's missed a lot. So hopefully this will get some of those super chats back. Okay, let's see if we got how many we got. Did we get any? Okay, I'm gonna have to cut and paste some of these. Looks like I might have missed several that I can't retrieve. All right, if you guys, if we're gonna have to cut and paste some of these. There was one super chat from Addison Weir that got retracted that I want to just thank for the super chat, but because he retracted the message, I can't comment on it. But appreciate the super chat. Yeah, I'm not going to answer that one. That one I'm not going to answer. So, there's one here I'm going to cut and paste. So, GN P17. I'm going to have to say paste this. If there's any that I missed in between, I apologize. Let me know that I've missed it, and I will try to address it before the end of the night. We just, as I said, we've been just amply blessed tonight, but there's just technology is just still not quite up to par on this one. Okay. Gian P17 for $10. Thank you very much for the super chat. You are the light of the world, and I'm honored to call you a brother in Christ. God bless you and your family. Well, thank you very much. I just wish our technology was just working a little better. I hate that timeout on YouTube. It just will, after a certain amount of time, timeout chats, and there's just nothing we can do about it. And if Twitch doesn't capture it, we just don't get it. So we're doing our best to try to address all the super chats. And now we're running into time constraints here too. But I really appreciate the support. Thank you so much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. And wow, God bless you also. That's a high compliment. I really appreciate that. So thank you very much. Okay, the next one. Okay, it's from the Camel Part for $5. Thank you very much for the super chat. Thoughts on the belief that Christianity isn't a religion but a relationship? I thought it was both. Yeah, I think it's both too. I mean, look. Yes, it is a relationship. Christianity is a relationship between you and Jesus Christ. It's also religion. So these aren't mutually exclusive concept. So you can have a relationship and have a religion, be a religion at the same time. Because it does answer the ultimate questions. You know, where do we come from? Where are we going? Who is God? What is man? What is our eternal destiny after we die? So these are fundamental questions of religion. So there is no question that Christianity is a religion, but it is also a relationship too. So the two aren't mutually exclusive. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And we are sort of, again, kind of moving things along here because we are running out of time. Okay, and this one here. We got a very, very generous super chat here from Jared Gilmore for $50. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciated. And he says, no questions tonight. Just wanted to pass along some of God's blessing. Well, thank you so much. That's a very, very generous super chat. We really appreciate it. We thank you so much, and we thank you for your support. It does bless us. It blesses us immensely. So we very, very much appreciate it, and are so grateful for supporters like you who help support this ministry. So thank you so very much. Okay, I don't know. Let me just see if there's... Yeah, it dropped off my list already. Yeah, I'll cover them, but I don't have... I need them on my display. I don't have them on my display at all.
I will repost them.
Okay. Yeah, repost them.
And you can check. There you go.
Okay. The next super chat here is from Beck of Siwa for £5 British. Thank you so much for the super chat. Were the Magi in the Bible? Also, what job roles would be in what? I think you mean what would their job roles be in today's society? Okay, great question. Great question. They're never specifically mentioned in the Bible, but they probably would have been there because there were some Magi at Avaris. So they would have been part of that mixed multitude that left Egypt with the Israelites. So there would have been Magi in there. Okay. Now, their job roles in Egyptian society were more along the lines of community organizers, police, basically police officers, constables. They sort of kept law and order, kept the peace. So they're kind of community leaders. So while we don't see Magi directly referenced in the Bible, they would have definitely been there, at least amongst the mixed multitude that came out of Egypt with the Israelites. And as I said, their roles today would have been sort of more along the lines of community service officers, police officers, peace officers, constables, more law enforcement, some along the lines of community organizers, or say minor administrators. So that was the role that the Magi played in ancient Egyptian society. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very, very much appreciate it. Okay, I'll go find him. Okay. All right, okay. There's two super chats that we're going to take here that got dropped off, and I can't retrieve them. So Kiara, thank you, Amir, for the super chat. And he goes, "What are your thoughts on doing a collaborative popcorn review?" I've done collaborative reviews before. I don't make them popcorn reviews specifically, but I don't have a problem with that per se. If someone wants to do a collaborative review, I'm fine doing collaborations. I actually love collaborations. Collaborations are a lot of fun. They are. But I also don't want to hog the spotlight either when I do a collaboration. So I want to make sure it's a collaboration where we're sort of evenly matched. Where we're equally yoked. So, but not this week. No, we don't want to do it this week. This week has been kind of a pain. So, we're not going to be doing it this week if we ever do a collaborative popcorn review. But I'm okay with it. I'm totally open to it. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he has a second super chat here. And he says, Hi, Dr. Falk. I recently heard that Hebrew isn't an actual language and was constructed in the 9th century and is actually Aramaic. This is wrong on all cases. And we know it's wrong as of like this month, absolutely categorically. That's because this month a couple tablets came out that basically proved that the mother of the Hebrew tongue was Amorite. Okay, so it's not descended from Aramaic. In fact, Aramaic is a later development. It's actually a much later development. The tablets that were recently published basically showed that Hebrew is very, very close to Amoritic. And the tablets that we have for Amoritic that have these Hebrew traits date to 1800 BC. So they're very old. They're very old. Hebrew is an actual language. I mean, the idea that it wasn't an actual language is silly. I mean, that's just silly. Now, while it's sort of matured in the 10th and 9th centuries BC into what we call, say, classical Hebrew, the changes that went between, say, what the Amorites spoke and what what classical Hebrew script is a lot less than what we had expected. So, given all that, we can definitely posit a kind of Hebrew, at least by the 13th century BC. It's probably much more similar to Amoritic than it is to, say, classical Hebrew, but Amoritic and classical Hebrew are not that far apart. But it's definitely, at this point, I think the evidence is really, really good that Hebrew descends from Amoritic, not from Aramaic. So anyway, thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. Okay, we are down to the last 10 minutes here. So we're not going to do any more non-super chats. We're going to acknowledge the remaining few. We're going to buzz through the last super chats here. And then we're going to call it a night. Because we've been going for 4 hours, and I do need to get up in the morning and go to work. So we'll get through the last few here. At least the last few I can see. Again, if I missed any of your super chats tonight, that was a technological glitch. I apologize for it, and maybe next week we'll get more lucky with that. So anyway, the next one here is from Michael Eternal for $5 Canadian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Given today's political climate, I felt appropriate to ask, was there a lot of nationalist patriotic fervor among the Jews, Egyptians, and Romans? Not so much amongst the Egyptians. Egyptian civilization was a lot more, say, passive. It's always been sort of a passive. Egypt was always ruled by. It was never it was a theocracy, but it was always ruled by a military dictator. So as such, Egypt was always more passive, so that when a foreign invader came in, it just sort of usually just accepted it. In the case of the Israelites, because of its particular religious inclinations, wasn't always ruled by. Israel was always more of a theocracy than it was a dictatorship. Even when it was ruled by, say, a strongman dictator. So there was always this sort of sentiment that if a ruler did not sort of bend the knee to the theocracy, that then nationalistic patriotic fervor sort of arose among, say, certain elements within Israelite society. This is some of the reasons why we find the rise of the Zealots in the first century. It's because, frankly, Roman rule, kind of, exacerbated that. So, you had that sort of idea in like Israelite culture that Israel should be ruled by Israelites. Egyptians didn't care. As long as the government wasn't too bad, Egyptians were happy to see the Persians leave. Greeks weren't so bad. They could tolerate Greek governance. So it didn't bother the Egyptians all that much that they were being ruled by Greek rulers. Romans had their own nationalistic sort of political ambitions. So it really was different from culture to culture and the circumstances of those cultures. So definitely you saw nationalism amongst Jews. You did not see it much amongst Egyptians. And again, Romans had their own ambitions. So anyway, that's probably the best way to answer this question. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciate it. Okay, we're back to Twidget. Okay, and yeah, Corey Coogan's next. I think it's is it 50? I think it's Romanian. Thank you very much for the super chat. Very much appreciated. And he asks, do other Canaanite languages, Moabite, Edomite, also descend from Amorite evidence but in the two tablets? No. Interestingly enough, they don't seem to come from Amorite, which is, I mean, there was sort of this idea of before the discovery of these Amorite tablets. There was this idea that you had archaic Semitic. And it was believed, and widely believed, that Moabite, Edomite, Hebrew all came from this archaic Western Semitic dialect. And that's because those Western Semitic languages are very similar. But one of the things we're kind of noticing now with these Amorite tablets is that there seems to be a direct line from Amoritic to Hebrew, but not necessarily a direct line from Amoritic to Moabite. Edomite, we just don't have enough language to determine it one way or the other. My guess is probably not. My guess is probably that Edomite is much more Canaanite. It wouldn't surprise me if at some point we find a tablet that helps us decipher, say, a more archaic version of Canaanite. But it does seem that Hebrew is taking a sort of a different language route, different language evolution than we find in Moabite and conceivably even Edomite. But from what we have of the Moabite language, it does seem to be more closer to Common Semitic than Hebrew is. Hebrew seems to be taking a direct route through Amoritic that Moabite is not taking. So that just seems to be what I can tell from first blush. Now, I have read the peer-reviewed article. I did take a very close look at it. A really interesting article, fascinating article. But it does seem that that's the trajectory that's going. So anyway, thank you for the super chat. Very much appreciate. What?
Is it against?
Okay. Okay. Interesting. If not, the tablets are kind of evidence. Are the kind against Canaanite origin hypothesis? Not necessarily. Okay. But it would change it. It would definitely change it. One of the things it would change about that Canaanite origin hypothesis is that you'd have to then look at areas of Amoritic concentration in Israel. And really the only area pre-13th century of Amoritic concentration is in northern Israel. Essentially, northern Israel, Tyre, across the northern region of Israel. So essentially from Byblos to the Heshbon and Arnon. Okay? So it would exclude the idea that the Israelites arose from southern Canaan, because southern Canaan did not have a lot of Amorites. You would have to then say that the Israelites emerged from northern Canaan, which would not completely invalidate Finkelstein's Canaanite origin hypothesis, but it would sure limit it. Sure limit it. So it would then have to say that the Israelites emerged from northern Israel as opposed to southern Israel. So it would limit his hypothesis, but it wouldn't directly refute it. So anyway, I hope that answered your question. Thank you very much for the question. So let's see what's next here. Bright yellow, okay. Make sure I here. Clever boy. I'm looking for clever boy. There's clever boy. Okay, let's see if it showed up on mine. Of course it didn't. Gotta cut and paste it. I like Twidget, but it's very unreliable when it comes to grabbing all the super chats. All right, we'll save this. Okay, we got our second to last. My bunny behind me is telling me it's time for dinner. She's telling me I'm late to feed her. All right, we got a $10 super chat from 1000 Clever Boy. Thank you very much for the super chat. God bless, and God bless you too. Thank you very much for the support. We really appreciate the super chat, and we appreciate the blessings and the prayers. So thank you so very much appreciated. And there's last super chat of the night. Yep, and I will. Which is from Ryan Naylor for $25. Thank you so much for that generous super chat. And he says, keep up the good work. You have inspired my son to spend his time studying the ancient Near East for God's glory. Praise the Lord. Absolutely praise the Lord. We love hearing that. This is why we do it. This is the reason. To get people back into their Bible and studying the Word of God and studying the ancient Near East, ultimately for God's glory. This is the whole reason we're here. This is why I gave up an a well-paying career to do this. Is to help people to love the Bible, love the ancient Near East, love history, and just, get excited over this stuff. Because it's God's word, and God is cool. So, I love this. I love this, and this is a wonderful way to end this live stream. So I very, very much want to thank you for that super chat. I've got another one. Well, we're almost done. It's another one from Jack Ray. Another very super generous super chat from a great supporter of this channel who's been very, very generous tonight for $50. Thank you so much. He says good night and thank you again. Well, thank you so much for your generosity. It's a great pleasure to serve this community. We are trying to build a strong community here of people who will basically, follow in our footsteps to do what we're doing. And we hope people are learning here and that they basically repeat what we do. Basically become educated in God's word, educated in scholarship, and basically are able to pass the flame on. So with that said, we are going to call it a night. We went past 4 hours here. We're not going to do a 5-hour marathon session. Sorry, Historical Strategy Gaming. I know you want that, but not this night. Okay, so with that said, I want to thank everyone who's joined us tonight. It was a great live stream. We just had an incredible outpouring of support tonight. We are so appreciated, and we want to thank everybody who is with us tonight. We had record numbers and just an amazing turnout. So I want to thank all our super chatters who basically help support this channel, keep food on the table. Want to thank our Patreon supporters who help keep our equipment running, and we really need that sometimes. It just really helps. We also want to thank our regular subscribers who view our videos, leave comments, likes, and dislikes because it feeds the algorithm. So with that said, have a great night, everyone. Thank you so very much for joining us tonight, and I'll see you next time on Ancient Egypt and the Bible.